And did you guys bring your calculators? Cool. I was not kidding when I said we are just going to jump right in. So where we're starting today is the Unit 3 math. And particularly the Unit 3 math is about taxes. So here's your T-bar and or your formula. What you're looking at in the top of the T-bar is giving you 3 formulas. So you can look at one or the other or both, however your brain sees it. Anytime we do math, I suggest you guys make a flashcard for the formula, because here's the deal. If you don't know how to solve for annual taxes, then you don't know how to get that problem right. I'm not kidding when I say that knowing the formula is like 80% of the battle. So always, always, always make flashcards out of formulas. And again, you can do one or the other. You can do the T-bar, which is what you're looking at top, or you can do the 3 formulas. You can know how to solve for the tax rate, know how to solve for the assessed value, or know how to solve for the annual tax bill. Makes no difference to me how you want to do it, just as long as you get it right. That's all we want to know, is the right answer. So I'm giving you just a minute to jot this down, and then we're going to get into the math piece. This is the tool we're going to use, and this will get us into the math piece in Unit 3. Did you guys get a chance to look at the math concepts in Unit 3? Get a chance to look over that and kind of start thinking about taxes? Good. I see some heads bobbing. Good. So the math that we're getting ready to get into, we got a few things to talk about before we actually pick up the calculator. But this is the formula or formulas that we're going to use. The math in Unit 3 is all about the annual tax bill or the assessed value or finding the tax rate. Please note on top, we're solving for the annual tax value. You guys see that annual tax value? So why don't you guys tell me in a chat, if the problem, for example, asks you to solve for monthly, let's just say the problem wants to know what the monthly taxes are. Do I have a formula? I said chat, but I'm kind of asking for yes or no. You can shake your head. Do I have the formula? When we're looking at our formula, do we have to solve for monthly tax bill? No, we only have to solve for annual tax bill. So what we're going to learn in just a minute is, once we solve, we may have to take an extra step. We may have to, for example, take our annual taxes and divide those by 12 to get monthly. How many months in a year? 12. So this is getting us started. I need you guys to really pay attention and read the questions, because I can almost promise you, if the question is asking for the monthly tax bill, the annual will also be an answer choice, banking on you just throwing it down without reading the question. You guys with me? So it's so important that when we're doing these math as we're going, that we read the questions. I generally encourage you guys to actually read the math questions 3 times. The first time, just read it. Don't pick up a calculator. Don't pick up a pencil. I know how badly you want to, but just read it. The second time, that's when you get to pick up the calculator. That's when you get to pick up your pencil and do the work. And then the third time you're going to read it, when you think you have an answer, I want you to go back and read it again to make sure the answer you have is in fact what they're looking for. Again, you're solving for annual, but if they're asking for monthly, you're going to get it wrong because you don't take that extra step. You know how to do it. You just didn't take that extra step and divide by 12. So don't do that to yourselves. So I vamp for a minute. Make sure you guys all had this written down. Does everybody have this? We all good? Because we're going to use this. Okay. So as a quick refresher, kind of some things we talked about last week. There's two different ways that taxes can be calculated. Your test is going to give you one or the other. It's never going to throw both different ways. So we're always going to do what the question asks us. First off, in North Carolina, we use something called ad valorem taxes. And in North Carolina, our tax rate is something per 100. When we're doing taxes, when we see this, we can think of the word per as meaning divide. So all we would have to do is take the tax rate, divide it by 100, and that gives us a number that we can plop into our T-bar or in our formula. So for example, if the problem tells you that the city tax rate is 0.73 per 100, then all you have to do on your calculator is say 0.73 divided by 100, and now we have a tax rate of 0.0073. And again, that's the number that we can use in the T-bar. So we want to make sure ad valorem, a tax rate per 100. Another thing that we're paying attention to when we read, another reason why it's so important just to read these test questions. You may see, and some of you may have already seen this if you got a chance to do any practice problems over the weekend. The problem may say, it may give you the city tax rate, and it may give you the county tax rate. All properties are located in a county. Everybody with me? All properties are located. We have 100 counties in North Carolina. All of them are in a county. Properties may be within the city limits. They may not be within the city limits. So if the problem tells you that the property is not in the city limits, then we're not going to use the city tax rate. They don't have to pay city taxes unless they're in the city limits. So again, you guys, we just need to make sure we're reading these problems, paying attention. Just because you see a number doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to use it. You need to consider it. And in these cases, I'm telling you where they like to trick you. Monthly tax liability, and here's the city rate, but the property is located outside of the city limits. So we got to pay attention. So ad valorem taxes is what we do in North Carolina, tax rate per 100. Other states may use a mill. A mill is just 1/1000. So we need to understand what we're dividing by. Are we dividing by 100 and using ad valorem, or are we dividing by 1,000 with the mill? Again, the problem is going to give you one or the other. It's not going to give you both. And we always need to do what the problem is asking. So for example, if the problem tells you that this property's tax rate is, this property's tax is determined on 17 mills, then we just take 17 divided by 1,000. And again, I now have a number that I can plop into my T-bar or into my formula. So we're taking one, or the mill divided by 1,000. What's the opposite of divide? The opposite of divide is multiply. And some of these problems, when we get to some more of the trickier problems, which I'll show you where those are in just a minute, some of these problems may figure out that if you know enough to divide, then you can solve the problem backwards. And anytime you're solving a problem backwards, we're going to do the opposite of what we did forward. So if going forward and we divided, now we solve backwards and we're going to multiply. So what if the problem gives you the rate of 0.017 and wants to know the mill? Well, didn't we divide to get to 0.017? So now to reverse that, we're going to say 0.17 times 1,000 to give us 17 mills. Again, you guys, a lot of this I know is trying to sort through this math. Some of you are, let's say, like math better than others. You know, when I do math tutoring, probably the #1 question I get is, when do I divide and when do I multiply? Julie, I never remember to divide, I never remember to multiply. And I'm telling you guys, my highly educated response to you is, do it both ways. If dividing isn't working out for you, if you're not liking the answer when you divide, then try multiplying and seeing what you get. So let's talk about some of these. So we see a problem. What's the first thing we're going to do? We're going to pick up our pencil and just start doing something, right? No. The first thing we do when we see a math problem is just read it. This one says calculate the annual property tax due for property in Forsyth County with a property tax rate of 1.01 per 100, a market value of 285,000 and an assessed value of 250,000. So we're going to find the annual property taxes. The first thing we want to identify is always, what is the problem asking us? Isn't that my focus? If it's not information that doesn't get me to annual property taxes, then I don't care about it. It's called a distractor. You guys have those formulas written down? How do I solve for annual taxes? What are the two pieces I need? I need the assessed value and the tax rate. So this problem gives me a tax rate. It gives me a market value of 285 and assessed value of 250. What does my formula tell me? My formula tells me I want the assessed value. So isn't my market value the distractor? Isn't that it's burning in us? We want to do something with that 285. But is it part of the formula? Is the market value part of the formula? Shake your head, yes or no. Is market value part of the formula? No. So that's your distractor. And this takes me back to what I say, when I say knowing the formula is 80% of the battle. If you don't know this formula, then you're trying to do something with the market value. Is everybody with me? Is everybody committed to putting this formula on a flashcard? So you can memorize it, so you can ask yourself over and over and over again. Please understand, you guys, usually near the end of class, somebody will ask me, Julie, do you have a piece of paper with all the formulas? I don't have them. Guys, I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, the answer is no. I do not have a piece of paper with all the formulas. I want you guys to put them on flashcards so you can memorize them, so you can get these right for the test. I can hand you a piece of paper, but what good is that going to do you? So we've read the problem, we've analyzed it a little bit, and now we can actually pick up our pencil and do something. When I'm doing math, well, first off, I read tax rate, and most of the time when I read rate or percent in a math problem, I know I can use a T-bar most of the time. So I saw the word rate, my mind said, throw down a T-bar. When I'm doing math, I generally like to start with where I want to end. And what I mean by that is the very first thing I like to do is identify my X, because that is all I care about. What is it that I am solving for? So as we already indicated, I'm solving for annual property taxes, which is the number on top of my T-bar. I know the whole or the assessed value is 250,000. And then I know my tax rate is 1.01 per 100. So when you take 1.01 divided by 100, we get 0.0101. And remember what we said. If the T-bar is not working out for you, then don't use it. Use the formulas. This is why we have several different options. All of our brains see it differently. So however you see it, makes no difference to me. By the way, we're going to do a few of these together, but never fear, I am going to turn you loose. I got some for you guys to work as well. I don't want to be the only one to have all the fun. So I got some for you guys to work as well in just a second. So I've completed my T-bar. What does the vertical line mean? What does the up-down line mean? The up-down line on the T-bar tells me I need to multiply. So on our calculators, on our not smart calculators, we're going to take 250,000 and divide it by 0.0101. Nope, 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 nope. We're going to multiply it. There we go. Sorry about that. By 0.0101. And I get annual taxes of $2,225. Now that I have an answer, now that I think I have an answer, I'm going to go back and make sure what I solve for is what they're asking. My X, the formula tells me I solve for the annual property taxes. What's the problem asking me for? They're asking me for annual property taxes. Now you can select A, B, C, or D, whichever one is $2,525. Okay. Well, that was fun. Let's do another one. Calculate the annual property tax due for a property in Forsyth County with a property tax rate of 1.01 per 100, a market value of 127,000, and an assessed value of 85% of market value. I read the problem. I see the word rate or percent. I'm going to throw my T-bar down. And the first thing I want to do is identify my X. What am I solving for? Once again, we're solving for the number of. Yes.
Yeah, I was communicating with you, what you just said. It's okay.
Yeah,
I was answering your question.
Good.
Finally got it working, so.
If you could just rename yourself then. So we have, if you go to participants, find your name. And then those 3 dots next to your name, you can click on rename. Good, I'm glad we got that work fixed, Martha. So I have a property tax rate. My tax rate is 1.01 per 100. So again, in this case, that word is just a fancy way of saying divide. So 1.01 per 100 gives me a rate of 0.0101. And then I have a market value of 127,000 and assessed value of 85% of the market value. Again, you guys, what does my formula tell me? My formula tells me I'm solving for, or I need the assessed value. We don't need the market value for these, do we? We need the assessed value. Who can remind me what the word of means in a math problem? What does that word of mean?
Times.
Multiply, times, absolutely. So how do I find the assessed value? I take 85% of the market value. So my assessed value, or my market value is 127,000. We're going to figure the assessed value on 85% of that. So 127,000 times 85% gives me an assessed value of $107,950. Up down line still means multiply. So we take 107,000 times 0.0101. And I get annual taxes. I rounded just a little bit there, $100,090.30. Questions on what we did? We have our $10,000 or $1,090.30. Go back and I learned that the problem is asking for the annual property taxes. So we know we're good. I always say miss the problem because you don't know how to do it. Don't miss it because you didn't do something simple like divide by 12. You'll only do that 1 or 2 times before you learn. So let's learn now and not on test day. Fair enough? This is what we're doing, is working all these kinks out now. Okay. Good times. Let's look at another one. Again, just reading the problem. What is the assessed value of a property located in Kernersville with a tax rate of 0.85 per 100 and an annual tax bill of $3,371? I have read the problem. I saw rate or percent, and I know if I choose, I can use the T-bar. This time, we've switched it up a bit, haven't we? Now, what is my X? What am I solving for? Now we want to know what
The value, the
assessed value
assessed
is.
value.
Yep, the assessed value. So now my X is the number in the bottom left. Everybody see that? That's what I'm solving for. That's what I'm trying to find, is that assessed value. I know my annual tax bill is $3,371. And I know my rate is 0.85 per 100. So I get 0.0085 is my rate. Now to solve for X, the horizontal line, the back fourth line, just means divide.
We're going to divide.
We're going to divide. So we take our number on top, divide it by the number on bottom. And I get an assessed value, is that right?
Yeah. I think I've got 396,588.23, which will round off to 24.
Which is to the penny what I.
Good deal.
What is the assessed value of this property? $396,588. Again, it's about knowing the formula. Knowing the formula tells you what numbers you need and where they go. So most of you just committed to me to making flashcards to memorize these formulas. This is the first one of, many, not many, quite a few. Questions? Okay. Well, now it's y'all's turn to have fun. So I'm going to put a problem up. You're going to take just a few minutes and work it. I want you guys to all tell me in a private chat. Private chat. So go ahead and set your chat to private. Remember, anytime we do math, I always ask for private. I don't want you to guys be so worried about getting it wrong. So you're going to tell me in a private chat. Everybody ready? Everybody got their private chat set? Do you feel the anticipation building? This is going to be fun. You ready? Okay. All right. Tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D, and then we will talk about it together. I'll give you about 30 more seconds and then we're going to talk about it. Okay. Good. I like it when you guys think, when you have to think. All right, so we see a math problem. First thing we're going to do is just read it. Just read it. The current market value of a property is $135,000. For tax purposes, it is assessed at 60% of market value. The tax rate is 2.45 per 100 of assessed value. What is the annual tax liability? So I read the problem. I saw the words rate or percent, which tells me I may not know anything else, but it tells me more than likely I can probably use a T-bar if that helps you. What I'm solving for is my annual taxes, which is the number on top. It tells me the market value is 135. It's assessed at 60%, and there's that word again, of market value. So how do we find the assessed value? We take our market value times 60%. So 135,000 times 60% gives me $81,000, and that's going to be our assessed value. Questions on how I got the $81,000? Then we got our tax rate, 2.45 per 100. So 2.45 per 100 is going to give me 0.0245. That's the number that goes in my T-bar. Up down line means multiply. So we take 81,000 times 0.0245. And we get an answer of $1,985 or C. Questions?
You did 2.45 times 100?
Divided by 100.
Right? Okay.
2.45.
I got it wrong because I was doing one when it said the value of the property. I did
the 135.
I did the 135, but I divided it by 12 for some reason per month for the year.
Oh,
Yeah.
so we're asking for the annual. And again, knowing that formula knows that when we solve it, we're solving for annual. So we don't need to take an extra step because that's our X. That's what we solved it for.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Okay. Here's another one. Again, tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. Do about 30 more seconds and then we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it in just a second. Okay. Got something? It didn't trick many of you, and I got to say, a few of you that it did trick, you found it. It's better when you find it, isn't it? So first thing we're going to do is what? Just read. This one says the market value of a house is $84,500. Taxes are assessed at 35% of market value. The tax rate is 30 mils. Question wants to know, what are the monthly taxes? In order to get to the monthly taxes, I first need to solve for annual, because that's what my formula tells me. Does everybody understand that? I can only work with what I got with the formula. Once I solve for annual taxes, then we'll talk about what we're going to do in just a second. So we have a market value is 84,500. Taxes are assessed at 35% of market value. So how do we find the assessed value? We take our market value of 84,500 times 35%. And we are going to have an assessed value of $29,575. I want to live here, right? All right, so we got 29,000 is our assessed value. And then we have, for our rate, we have something called a mill. If ad valorem is per 100, then mill is 1/1000th. Other states use that mill. So to solve for a mill, we take 30 and divide it by 1,000 this time, not 100, because it's not ad valorem. Ad valorem is 100, mills are 1,000. So 30 divided by 1,000 gives me a tax rate that I can use in my T-bar. Up down line means multiply. So we take 29 in our not smart calculator. 29,575 times 0.03, and I get annual taxes of 887.25. The answer is clearly A. There's no doubt about it, right? What? Once you think you have an answer, I need you to go back and make sure the answer you have is in fact what they're looking for. In this case, what are they looking for? Monthly taxes. So we take our annual taxes and divide by 12 to get our monthly tax rate of $73.94 or C. Questions? I got plenty of practice for you guys. I'll show you in just a second where it is. Guys, please always remember throughout this class, the end of class exam and your state exams are not math tests. These are real estate exams with some math in it. In other words, I don't want you guys wanting to freak out over the math. Okay, there's not enough math alone to fail. You could get all the math wrong and still pass both of these tests. However, we give you the practice because if you can get some of this math, and that may give you a few extra points, maybe in another area that you're not as strong, that you may have a weakness. So it's so important that you guys practice. You can watch me do it all day long, but until you go attempt to do it on your own, that's when you really learn. That's when it starts to click. You know what I won't be doing for you on your tests? I'm not doing the math. So I got to wean you guys off and let you go off on your own. And that's why I give you practice. So with all that being said, we are wrapping up Unit 3. Remember on Thursday, we have our key terms that we're back at the beginning of Unit 3 on page 51. Your key point review at the end of Unit 3, which is on page 65. And then you have the quiz for Unit 3, which is on page 67. And then when we have math, the units that have math, those units have the math concepts section. This math is on pages 63 and 64. Kind of walks you through, gives you some more examples. Again, you guys, we don't read math, we do math. So in your book, when you see example 1, cover the answer in the book and work the problem. I'm telling you, if you do it in your own style, that's going to help it click. I got some stuff in the online learning system I'll show you in just a second. But I also want to point out, you have in your book, starting on page 803, there are 50 problems in the back of the book. And what I have done when we do math, I have gone through those 50 problems in the back of the book, and I've pulled out the numbers that relate to the math that we just did. So this gives you extra practice for property tax math. So these are the numbers, jot these down, 6, 18, 22, and 38. These are the numbers in the back of the book that relate to the math that we just did to give you some extra practice. I personally consider the 50 problems in the back of the book to be like 201 material. They tend to be a little bit trickier. They tend to be a little bit harder. So build up to the ones in the back of the book. Start with the online learning session. Start with the end of the unit. I truly feel that if you can do the 50 problems in the back of the book, you'll be good for your test. So build up to it. And again, I got some more in the online learning system. Everybody have these 4 numbers jotted down? Practice, practice, practice. Y'all are going to get sick and tired of me saying it when it comes to math. But you know how you get math? Practice, practice, practice. All right, Julie, we hear you. Before we go into the online learning system, I just want to show this. You're not going to be tested on this, but this is just to help you guys understand the importance of practicing. There's been studies about how adults learn, and one study came up with this learning pyramid. You guys see how much of the math you just retained by doing it in class with me? About 5–10%. Are you satisfied with that? That's not a good retention rate, is it? Look at what happens when you go off and do it on your own. See what big of a difference it makes to practice. You want to take it a step further? Teach somebody else how to do property tax math. And that'll really up your retention rate. We're going to see tax math again. When we get into Unit 21, we're going to talk about how the buyers and sellers are going to prorate or share this year's taxes. If you were buying my house in May, let's say you buy my house in May, is it fair for either one of us to pay the whole year's property tax? I only own it the first 5 months. You own it the rest of the year. Is it fair for either one of us to pay the whole year taxes? No. So in Unit 21, we're going to talk about how we take that annual taxes and we're going to make it fair between the parties. We're going to prorate it between the buyer and the seller. So that way we're all doing our fair share. So we'll see this again. So, you know, again, if we practice now, then we have it. And I need to stop sharing just for 1 second. Bear with me, please. So you guys can all wave at each other. So if we look, I'll come back and get you. If we look in the online learning system, there's some good stuff in the Unit 3 material. This was just added this morning. So guys, get in the habit of logging out of the online learning system every time. So that way, if we add something or change something, you'll always see the current. So everybody just log out every time you're done. So just added this morning. The Real Estate Commission has provided a good amount of Q&A brochures on various topics. And for those that relate to what we talk about class, we've included these in the online learning systems as another resource to help you guys kind of wrap your brains around this information. So here's a Q&A on condos and townhomes. Most of these brochures from the commission are written, well, they're all written to the consumer. Most of them are going to be written to the buyer to help the buyer educate themselves before they purchase. But again, as you guys are learning this material, I think these Q&A brochures are good resources to help you guys get through it. There's also a little section here. I thought, maybe not. It's another one. Never mind. Forget I said that. So Q&A brochure on condos and townhomes. Make sure we have a good understanding of the difference of those. And then also here's a property tax math worksheet. So it goes through, asks you various questions about math. I do include the solutions, not for you to study the solutions, but for you to use them if you got to know if you got it right or wrong, and to help you work through them. Studying the answers is not going to help you, I promise. The questions you're looking at here are not test questions. But again, it's about giving you that practice in the solutions so you can get through it. Another Unit 3 quiz. Oh, and then here are the 4 numbers from the back of the book. So you have those here as well. Any questions on Unit 3? Remember, Unit 3 was all about encumbrances. Anything that affects property. Property taxes are something that affect real property. Okay. We keep going. Up next, Unit 4. Unit 4 is our property description. How we can identify property, how we can describe property. So a couple things to look at, our roadmap for Unit 4. We're going to talk about, describe the different types of legal descriptions. We're going to talk a little bit more about a survey. We introduced you the idea of a survey last week when we were talking about the fence. But now we're going to talk more about the survey now that we're talking about those property lines. And then there's some area math, some square footage math, acreage math. Here's the good news. You guys want some good news? I'm not a mean person, and I'm not going to do math to you twice in one class. I'm not going to do it. That would just be cruel. So we've already done math once this class. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the material in Unit 4, and then we're going to skip the math in Unit 4 for now. When we come together on Thursday, we will start with doing, we'll go back and pick up the math in Unit 4. Is that fair? Everybody good with that? We're going to skip it for now, give you a minute to wrap your brains around property tax math. And then on Thursday, we'll come back and do the math for Unit 4. So the non-math in Unit 4 talks about the legal descriptions. The legal description is just a way to identify the property lines. It tells you the lines. It's kind of a tour of the property, tells you what's all included. It doesn't specifically mention the improvements, but we know the improvements within the property line are pertinent, which means they're going to convey. Surveyors are the ones that get to identify the property descriptions. We're going to talk about survey, importance of encouraging your buyers to have a survey done before they purchase. We'll talk about that in just a second. There are 4 different ways that we can use to identify the property lines. 4 different ways. The first method of identifying the property line is something called meets and bounds. Meets and bounds is how we primarily define the legal description in the original 13 colonies. And yes, North Carolina is one of the original 13. Meets and bounds is what we use the most often in North Carolina. We may be able to use another one. We'll talk about that in a second. But mostly the one that we use in North Carolina is meets and bounds. Meets and bounds uses something called a point of beginning. The point of beginning actually serves as the starting and the ending place. So what we're going to do with the meets and bounds is we're going to start at the point of beginning, and we're going to take a tour of the parameter of the properties. We're going to go so far and then go and then turn and then turn and turn. We'll look at pictures in just a second. Surveyors use monuments to tell them when to turn, to tell them when that property line needs to turn. Monuments can be put there by nature, maybe a tree or a big rock or a body of water. Monuments can also be placed by the surveyor. Have you guys ever seen land property that's recently been surveyed? One telltale sign that a surveyor has been there is they leave the little like wood stakes with the little pink flags on it. That's how you know a surveyor's been there. They have marked their monuments. So in just a bit, when we talk about the survey and the importance of the buyer getting a survey, you know, the seller maybe had the survey when they purchased. Maybe they're willing to share that with the buyer. Maybe they're not. That's a different conversation with the seller if they want to share it or not. Some do, some don't. Even if the seller is willing to share their survey with the person thinking about buying, the person thinking about buying is encouraged to perform their own survey, to have their own survey done. Let me ask you guys a question. Do trees fall down? Do bodies of water dry up? Do monuments get moved? So because we don't know if monuments are moved when this buyer's buying versus when the seller was buying, buyers are encouraged to have a survey done as part of their inspection period. I had a builder friend once, a developer, and well, I mean, I still have him as a friend, but he once told me that he purchased this huge tract of land, cleared it, leveled it, and then had the surveyor come in to identify the different lots. He was subdividing it so he could build houses on it, sell each house. Surveyor spent like a week. The tract of land was that big. The surveyor spent like a week out there marking and identifying lots. That weekend, we're assuming some kids came along. They got bored, they came along and they moved every single one of those markers. Now we're assuming these were kids. We weren't assuming that these were adults, but you guys are with me. That whole week's worth of work was pretty much, I mean, we had an idea, they had somewhere to start, but when those monuments move, then we no longer know those property lines. The other things the meets and bounds uses is actually meets and bounds. Meets and bounds are the calls or the directions. So the meets and bounds tells a surveyor which way to turn, where to turn, how far to go, etc. So let's look at a picture. Let's speak survey for just a second, or surveyor for just a second. So you see, I have this tract of land, and let's pretend you're the surveyor trying to identify this tract of land. We start with the point of beginning, which is up here in the top left. You guys see this? So the point of beginning, and then we use the meets and bounds or calls to go, you know, we're going to go down this line 80 degrees until we get to this monument. This tells us to turn. And then we use calls to go down this line, tells us how far to go, turn at this monument, meets and bounds, calls. Don't know what just happened. Calls till we get to this monument. And we go from monument to monument until we get back to the point of beginning. And what this surveyor has done is identified, these are the property lines. He didn't identify what's in the property line. Is there a house in there? Is there a fence? Is there a shed? I don't know. All he did was identify the property lines. And what we know is everything within the property lines will convey, improvements within the property lines will convey. Look with me, if you will, in your book on page 73. '73 gives us another picture. Again, this time we can use, or the surveyor can use, our point of beginning, north of Jones Road, west of Skull Drive, using Skull Drive as a property line. Till we hit our monument, then we come down to Red Skull Creek, using that as our property line until we hit Jones Road, and then back up to our point of beginning. What I really want you guys to see on page 73, do you see the paragraph above the picture? Starts with a tract of land located in whatever county, North Carolina, described as follows. Y'all, that's surveyor speak. Y'all want the good news? We don't interpret that. I don't speak surveyor, I speak agent, I speak broker. So when your buyer has a lot of questions about the survey and what does this mean, what are we going to do? What do you think we're going to do? We going to try to interpret it for them and figure it out? No, we're going to let the professional handle it. Remember, I'm teaching you guys to stay in your lane. Unless you are a licensed surveyor, you can't speak survey. So when we see this, when we have the survey done and your buyers have lots and lots of questions, don't feel like you need to interpret this for them. Connect them to the surveyor and let them identify. Does this make sense? All I'm doing is encouraging my buyer to have a survey done. Stay in your lane. Questions on meets and bounds. Primary method used in North Carolina. Okay. All right, let's take our first break, take 10. We come back, we're going to keep going in unit 4. Are we back? So I am going to go ahead and take attendance. We can see you. And we are jumping back in. We've talked about, and I have taken attendance, so if you're just now coming back, please tell me in a private chat. Thank you. So make sure we count you present for this hour. So meets and bounds is one way to identify, to do the legal description, the property description. And what the meets and bounds does is it gives us a tour of the parameters of the property. It tells us what the property lines are. Another method, another way to do the legal description is something called the rectangular government survey system. We don't do this much in North Carolina. And please make sure you tell me you're back. We don't use this much in North Carolina. This is mostly used out west. Shake your head. Does this look like our land? Does this look like our great state? Not really. It's kind of flat, isn't it? We got mountains and foothills and at least little slopes. It's pretty flat. So the government rectangular survey system does better for this flat land. Yeah, do I have a question? So the rectangular survey system is mainly used west of the Mississippi. We're not going to use this here. And what the rectangular government survey system is a grid system. Thank you for letting me know. Please make sure you tell me you're back, you guys. If you don't know if you made screenshot for attendance, tell me you're back. If you don't know, just tell me. That way we know you know you're here, or I know you're here. So they use this grid system, and pretty much what they do is take this grid system and place it over the map, and that's how they can identify the areas from the survey system. The grid system uses meridian lines and base lines. Meridian lines are your north-south lines. Base lines are your east-west line. Couple numbers we may need to know that relate to the rectangular government survey system. No math, but numbers that we need to know. The survey system is divided into something called a township. What we need to know is that townships have 36 sections. We'll look at a picture in just a second. Each one of those sections contains 640 acres. So how many sections in a township? 36. How many acres in each section? 640. So let's look at some pictures together. Turn with me, if you will, to your book on page 76. The first picture you're looking at, figure 4.5, is our section, our township. And it shows that it has 36 sections. They always say that when you're counting, you always start at the top right, is always going to be number one. And you count like you're plowing a field. Now, I myself have never personally plowed a field. But if I were to plow a field, it makes sense, doesn't it? We start at the top right with number one and we go backwards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we come down 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then we come down again 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. You guys see, we're just going to go back and forth and back and forth. And that helps us identify, or helps them identify, what section of the township we're in. The other picture there on page 76, figure 4.6, if we take section 16, you guys see how 16 is kind of gray? If we take section 16 and blow it up and just look at section 16. That's what we're looking at in figure 4.6. So that 640 acres in section 16 is divided further between all of those property owners. It identifies what they own based within that section. Page 77 talks about reading a survey description. It talks about determining how many acres are in a tract of land within a section. You guys want the good news? You're no longer tested on that. You don't have to do the math for the rectangular survey system anymore. So we don't need you to read the survey description. We don't need you to, you see that math shortcut, the box there on the left, and it tells you there's 10 acres. We don't need to do that anymore. Is that good news? Okay. Kimberly's happy. What we need to understand from a township sections, the government survey system, there's 36 sections in a township. Each section contains 640 acres. So rectangular survey is our second way to identify the legal description. The third method surveyors can use to identify is referring to a recorded plat map. You may hear the recorded plat map also referred to as the lot and block system, same thing. You guys are going to learn in real estate, sometimes we got several different words that mean the same thing. Makes it fun, keeps us on our toes. The recorded plat map is going to be recorded in the county where the property is located. We're going to talk more about recordation and what goes on the public records in just a minute when we get into Unit 5. Typically where we see recorded plat maps, or the types that we see recorded plat maps with, is going to be subdivision. You're probably not going to find a recorded plat map downtown. What we're looking for is a subdivision. In North Carolina, we can reference a recorded plat map if it's available. So if it's available, we can use that. If there's questions or it's not available, then the surveyor is going to do the meets and bounds. So we have a picture of a recorded plat map on page 78. Page 78. And this is a subdivision with a cul-de-sac. The top left, you got lot 1. Next to it is lot 2, lot 3, lot 4 around the cul-de-sac, 5 coming down the other end, 6, 7, and 8. And 8 is back out at the street. You guys see the different lot numbers there? The different lot numbers tell us the dimensions, how big the lot is. It tells us where the streets are. It tells us if there's an easement. If we look in between lots 3 and 4, there's an easement for public utilities. On lot 4, there's an easement for drainage. So again, if these are available, the surveyor will use them. If your buyer has questions, they want to be encouraged to have a meets and bounds or talk to the surveyor. We're going to talk about subdivisions and recording and plat maps and all that good stuff. We'll revisit the idea of it when we get to Unit 5. The fourth method that we have, the surveyor has to identify the legal description, is referring to a previously recorded deed. We're not doing this much anymore. Deeds should have the legal description on them. However, the legal description on a deed, a lot of times is that surveyor speak that we saw back on page 73. So even though you may have the legal description on your deed, you may not know what it means because we don't speak survey. Another reason why we don't use these much anymore, I'm not going to lie, we got lazy in our past And instead of taking the time to write out the entire legal description on the deed, we would say something like, see previously recorded deed. So you go back to the public search, back to the tax or the public records, you find the previously recorded deed to get the legal description. And the previously recorded deed says, see previously recorded deed. That doesn't help us. How far back are we supposed to go? So it's not a reliable method. It's in surveyor language. So we don't use this much anymore. We're going to talk about deeds in the next unit when we get to unit 5. So we got meets and bounds, government rectangular survey system, recorded plat map. And then the one we're not using much today is referring to a previously recorded deed. There's something called an informal reference. Informal references don't really help us out much when it comes to identifying the property. The best example of an informal reference we have is a street address. Street address doesn't tell us much. Street numbers, street names change sometimes. You guys live in an area where they've recently renamed some streets. When you get out to rural areas, you may have a street address and then a mailing address. You may have 2 separate informal references. So it's just not the best method. That's what we mean by an informal reference. It's not the best method to identify the property. When we are conveying property, when we are selling, when one person is selling property to another, the street address alone is not sufficient. Obviously, we're going to use a street address, but in addition to the street address, we're going to have the legal description, the lot number, as much of the property information as we can, so we all know this is the property we're talking about. We will see that description where we're going to fill that description in when we do our offer to purchase and contract, when we get to unit 10. We can use a street address in a listing agreement or a lease because we're not conveying. Only used when we convey a sales contract, deeds, other documents. Street address alone is not sufficient. So let's talk about the survey. Surveys are prepared by a licensed surveyor. Unless you're a licensed surveyor, we cannot give opinions about property boundaries, easements. Guys, we're not out there trying to eyeball property lines. We are not out there trying to identify property lines. We talked about the fence last week. Remember, we said the only thing you know by looking at a fence is that somebody put a fence there. I don't know if it was surveyed. I don't know if the fence is in the proper place. Maybe it's within your property lines. Maybe it's an encroachment. And that fence is going over onto somebody else's, your neighbor's property. I have found in my experience that it is challenging to encourage buyers to have a survey done. Now, if they're buying a condo, there's no land, don't even need to bring it up, do we? There's no land, there's nothing to survey. If we're doing a townhome, maybe, but really what we're looking here is single family homes, anything that has land. And it's been my experience, y'all, I've heard this stuff before from buyers. We're out back in the backyard talking about them having a survey done. And I've had buyers look at me and say, Julie, do you see the fence line? The fence line tells me where my property lines are. What do you guys think about that? Does that tell them? Does that say, oh yeah, as long as you're looking at the fence, you're fine? No, because the only thing we know by looking at a fence is that somebody put a fence there. Y'all, I've had buyers tell me they don't need a survey because of the mow line. They could have hired like a 14-year-old to cut the grass. Do you think the 14-year-old knows where the property lines are? Are they getting close enough? My point is that we can't eyeball it. The only way to know the property lines for sure is to encourage the buyers to have a survey. Buyers have inspections and investigations that they should be encouraged to do once we go under contract. We're going to talk about that, the things they should be encouraged to do, the contract to closing process. We're going to get to that when we get into units 10. But buyers should be encouraged to have a survey so they can identify the property lines. Lenders used to require surveys many years ago, and they stopped requiring. However, if there's question about the lines, if there's question about whether or not it's in a flood hazard, for example, the lender may still require a survey, but for the most part, it's up to the buyer if they choose to do so or not. We're going to talk about something when we get to unit 5 called title insurance. And what we're going to learn is that title insurance may not cover the buyer, now known as the new owner. Title insurance may not cover the owner if the issue could have been identified by having a survey done. If we have a survey, we can identify issues such as encroachments. Remember what we said an encroachment was? Your property improvement or your improvement is expanding over into somebody else's property. Title insurance, we'll revisit that in unit 5. And then if the property's in a flood hazard or a flood zone, the only way to identify that is a survey. We got a whole unit dedicated to insurance, and that does include flood insurance. So we will talk more about flood hazards and insurance when we get to unit 13. That's all of unit 4 other than the math. Short, sweet, and to the point. Don't we wish all of them were like this? So again, I'm going to skip the math for now. This is where we're going to start on Thursday. But I do have one thing I would like you guys to do between now and Thursday so we can better have a conversation about the math. I want you guys to memorize this number. I don't even care if you know what it means just yet. Between now and Thursday morning, I want you guys to memorize 43,560. And when we start Thursday morning, we're going to start with dealing with this number. So I'm going to ask all of you in the chat Thursday morning, and I want all of you to come back and say 43,560. One of my favorite ways, there's several different creative ways out there for you guys to memorize this. I mean, you can put it on a flashcard, of course. But one of my favorite ways to memorize this number is if you can remember 4 little old ladies driving 35 and a 60. Have we been behind them before? Oh, yeah. 4 little old ladies driving 35 and a 60. Put it on a flashcard. Write it on the Post-it in your bathroom mirror. I don't care. Just memorize this number. When we come back on Thursday, I'm going to ask you guys, hey guys, how many square feet are in 1 acre? And every single one of you are going to tell me 43,560. And then we're going to take this number and build on it when we do the math on Thursday. Questions on the non-math stuff in unit 4. I need to stop sharing just for 1 second while you guys are asking questions. Questions on the non-math in unit 4. All right. Big deep breath. Unit 5. Unit 5 is more about transferring title to real property, how we can convey from one party to another, seller to buyer, and the different things involved in that transfer. So in Unit 5, we're going to talk about the different methods that we can use to transfer title. We're going to define title as well. So we're going to identify the different methods. We're going to talk about the deed and the different types of deeds. There are some required elements, some essential elements for a valid deed. So we'll have a conversation about that. We'll talk about the different types of deeds that we have available. We're going to talk more about the attorney's responsibility in this process, them doing the title examination, recordation of various documents. There is a brief discussion, teeny tiny math on some excise tax at the end of Unit 5. So we may get to that today, but it's not. You need to know one thing so we can handle this. So in Unit 5, let's start. I'm on page 86. And let's start by talking about what the title is. Title is the right to or ownership of the land and the documentary evidence that you are the owner of record. The documentary evidence we're going to learn, that was a terrible line. The documentary evidence we're going to learn in just a second is also known as the deed. So the title is the idea of ownership. The deed is the proof. The title is the idea. The deed is the tangible proof. The deed is what you have to touch, showing, saying that you are the owner of record. The deed is what can help protect you as the owner of record from third parties. We talked about our bundle of legal rights. That's the idea behind the title and what it represents, our deep C. Like we said, the deed is the documentary evidence that protects owners from other parties. Do you guys want somebody to show up to the judge and try to lay claim on your property? How are you going to prove it's yours? And they can't? You show them the deed. You show them the proof. I would like you guys, just look with me real quick on page 86. Figure 5.1 on 86 gives us some different names. You got the type of the document they're referring to, you got the giver and the receiver. I want you guys to take your pencil and over or near giver, I want you to write a big OR. Over giver or near giver, I want you to write a big OR. Over receiver or near receiver, I want you to write a big EE. This is probably the last time you're going to hear me say throughout this class, giver and receiver. What you're going to hear me say going forward is the giver and the receivee. How do you know who's given the document? How do you know who's receiving the document? It's the difference in the OR and the EE. Everybody see that? So for example, we're going to talk now in this unit about the deed. The grantor is the giver of the deed, also known as the seller. The receivee of the deed is the grantee, also known as the buyer. It's way too easy to put seller and buyer on your test. What are they going to put? Grantor and grantee. So it's important that we understand what that OR and that EE means. We will talk in Unit 10. We're going to talk about the offer and the counter offer. We're going to talk about the lease in Unit 11, the mortgage in Unit 14, option installment contract in Unit 10. Probably not much with the will and the contract. But my point is we're going to refer back to this chart, back to this graph. And we need to know who's the one giving the document and who's the one receiving the document. Anybody have that on your book? Real big, You can see it, highlight it, circle it, and know we'll refer back to it. So the first thing this unit does is talk about different methods that we can transfer title, different methods that we can transfer title. And the first method that we can transfer title is voluntary alienation. If you are alienating yourself from your property, you are separating yourself from your property. You're separating yourself from your property. And if you're doing this, if you're separating yourself voluntarily, you're either selling the property or you're gifting it, but you are separating yourself, you are alienating yourself from your property using a deed. You're doing it on your own free will. So at the top of page 87, we're looking at something called requirements for a valid deed, valid conveyance, essential elements of a valid deed. We're going to see several things in this class that talk about the essential elements. So let's make sure we understand what these essential elements are. Think of the essential elements as like required ingredients. If you don't have all of the required ingredients, then you don't have a valid document. And when we're trying to figure out the validity of a document, we're thinking through the eyes of the judge. What is the judge using to determine, in this case, if this deed is valid or not? You guys ever baked a cake? Or watched somebody bake a cake or eaten a cake? Okay, so when you're baking a cake, aren't there certain ingredients that you just have to have? What do you have to have with a cake? You got to have flour and water and oil and an egg. Have you ever tried to bake a cake without flour? I mean, I haven't either, but I'm not going to get a cake if I don't put flour in it, right? I'm going to get goo. And that's what we mean by these essential elements, these required ingredients. They're required, they're must have. So the top of page 87 lists the things that are required in order for the judge to determine if the deed is valid or not. The first thing the judge is going to look for is that it's got to be in writing. An oral deed isn't going to get you anywhere. Remember, title is the idea. The deed is the documentary evidence. The deed is the tangible proof. So it has to be in writing. The judge is looking for the legal capacity of the grantor. Who's the grantor? The giver, also known as the seller. So we have to have legal capacity of the grantor. Question came in, I apologize, I just pulled my chat back up for some reason. Is the title and the deed two different things? It's the same idea. The title is the idea of ownership. The deed is the proof. It's the piece of paper that you can touch and you can hold and you can say, I own this property. So with the valid deed, it has to be in writing, legal capacity of the grantor. That legal capacity is so that they can convey, so they can sell the property. The deed has to name both parties. Grantor and grantee are going to be named. There has to be words of conveyance. Now, by words of conveyance, the grantor needs to state their intention to convey. So the deed is actually going to say, I, the grantor, convey 123 Main Street to the grantee. They state their intent, for example. They state their intention to convey. There needs to be an accurate legal description. The deed is signed by the grantor. Only the grantor signs the deed because they are the ones conveying it. They are the ones giving it to the grantee. The grantee has to receive it, accept it. One way that they may do this is to record at the public courthouse. Put record, let everybody, public records know, I am the owner of record for this property. So if these are the essential elements, the required ingredients, again, when the judge is trying to determine if this deed is valid or not, these are the things that the judge is looking for. Let me ask you guys a question. When you're eating that cake, do you like other stuff on the cake? Do you like icing? Maybe some ice cream, some sprinkles, some whipped cream? What do you like on your cake? Maybe a cherry on top? Ice cream is not an essential element of cake, is it? It's not a required ingredient. It's extra. It's above and beyond. The deed also has above and beyond stuff. If you will, look with me on page 88. Page 88 tells us elements that are not required. They're often present. They help enhance the deed, but the judge is not looking for these. They're extra. So on page 88, elements that are not required, deeds do not have to be witnessed. These don't have to be dated. The judge isn't looking for a date, but doesn't it kind of make good sense to put a date on it so we all know when this happened? But again, you guys, the judge isn't looking for a date. It's not an essential element. It's not a required ingredient. Deeds are going to have some form of consideration, but they don't have to have the exact amount. Very rarely do you see the exact amount of what you purchased on your deed. Part of that is, well, it may not be anybody else's business what I bought for it, but two, these home values can change, home values can fluctuate. So quite frankly, what you buy it for today means absolutely nothing 5 years, 10 years, 30 years from now. So very rarely, it's got to have some form of consideration. There has to show that some money or something of value changed hands in order for the grantee to receive this deed. But very rarely is it the exact amount. Deeds don't have to be notarized. Sometimes they are, but they don't have to be. That's not what the judge is looking for. Deeds do not have to be recorded to be valid. This is probably the problem topic. So go ahead and highlight it and draw you an arrow at it and circle it and make it real big. The judge doesn't care if a deed is recorded or not. The judge will determine the validity of a deed as long as it meets the essential elements. However, later in this unit, we're going to introduce you to something called the Connor Act. So while the judge doesn't require the deed to be recorded, Connor Act does. Recording is an extra ingredient. It's the sprinkles on top. It's not a required ingredient. And then the last thing here is deeds don't have to be sealed. If you've ever had a notary, for example, seal a document, they like press down on it and like raises the document and embosses it, you know what I'm talking about, and gives you that texture. That's the seal. Again, can we put the seal on it? Of course we can. But it's an extra agreement. It's an element that is not required. So top of page 87 tells us the essential agreements of a valid deed. What is the judge looking for when they're determining if it's valid or not? Page 88 is the extras. We'll talk more about Connor Act in just a minute. So now what we're going to do is talk about, there's more than one kind of deed. So now we're going to talk about the different types of deeds. And the first type of deed we have, probably the most commonly one used, is something called a general warranty deed. We may refer to a general warranty deed as a full covenant warranty deed, or maybe just a warranty deed. The general warranty deed offers the most protection for the grantee. Who's the grantee? The receiving, the buyer, the person receiving the deed. So the general warranty deed offers the most protection for the buyer. It offers the most protection by the buyer because it gives the grantor the greatest degree of liability. It makes the grantor legally bound to certain covenants or warranties that we'll look at. This is one thing to note about the general warranty deed. The general warranty deed says, if I'm giving you the general warranty deed of my home, I'm saying nobody can encumber it, has encumbered it during the time I owned it. But I'm also saying, not only did nobody encumber it during the time I owned it, but nobody owned it before nobody encumbered it before I owned it. The general warranty deed promises the grantee free of encumbrances from today back to the beginning of time. So the seller's telling the buyer, if there's any liens on them, I'll pay them off before we convey. That's part of the closing process that we will talk about. There's nobody out there that can show up and lay claim to the property. There's nobody out there that can show up on your front door and say, this is mine. This is what the seller is promising the buyer. That's a heck of a promise to make, isn't it? When we get going a little bit further, we're going to learn the buyer hires the closing attorney. When we get to the contract to closing process, the buyer hires the closing attorney. And one of the biggest responsibility that the closing attorney has to their buyer client is to do this very thorough search in the public records to find everything that could encumber the property, that could prohibit the seller from offering this general warranty deed, to make sure when the buyer buys, they're starting with a clean slate. They don't want anybody from the past showing up. They don't want any specific liens to transfer down from the seller to buyer. That's what the closing attorney does for the buyer. They clear all that. They make sure it's good to go so that the seller knows that's what they're handing the buyer, particularly in a general warranty deed. Again, you guys, it's not just during the time I owned it. It is back to the beginning of time. The owners before me, the owners before them, etc. That's a heck of a promise to make, isn't it? This is why we have attorneys involved to make sure that that process is handled. So with the general warranty deed, there's usually 5 covenants or 5 warranties that the seller offers the buyer, the grantor offers the grantee. First, we have covenant of cession and the right to convey. The grantor warrants, they promise that they are the legal owner of record. They promise that they are the ones that can transfer, they can convey this property to the grantee. There's a covenant against encumbrances. Everything in Unit 3 that we talked about was an encumbrance. If something is found, maybe for example, an unpaid lien, or maybe an encroachment on the property, the attorney is going to get with the seller to clear this up. The seller has got to offer a clean slate to the buyer. So the seller's promising the seller there are no encumbrances. There's the covenant of quiet enjoyment. The grantor is warranting that the title will be good against third parties. The grantor is warranting that somebody can't show up and say, I have an ownership interest in this property. Remember last week we talked about joint tenants and tenants in common and tenants by the entirety and all that good stuff. What if you own this property as tenants in common with, I don't know, 20 people? And all 20 of those people were married. We need 40 people to show up to convey property, don't we? Sometimes we tend to think that it's only 2 spouses buying, but you could have where you got 40 people that are selling. So this quiet enjoyment, if all 40 people don't show up and sign that deed, then we can't convey it. We need everybody on board to sign. And if you have that one lone spouse, you have 39 people show up, and that one lone spouse that doesn't, then they can't offer that covenant of quiet enjoyment. When we get into Unit 8, we're going to talk about our listing agreement, starting our relationship with the sellers. And we're going to talk about the importance of making sure that we have all sellers on board from day one. Because if all of them aren't going to show up to sign that deed, it's not going to happen. Would you guys rather do the work up front, or would you rather go through the whole entire transaction, get to the day of closing, and find out that a spouse is not willing to participate and the whole thing was done for nothing? Right? So quiet enjoyment, title be good against third parties, covenant of further assurance. The grantor promises to deliver any instrument needed to make the title good. Again, if we have an outstanding lien, the seller is going to pay it off. If there's an encroachment, we're going to figure it out. We're either going to tear that part of the fence down, or we're going to create an easement. This further assurance is the buyer's guarantee that the seller is going to fix any errors before it's conveyed, any blemishes before it's conveyed. And then the covenant of warranty forever says, look, if anything in this deed fails later, I'll come back and make it right. The seller is promising the buyer that if something comes up after the fact, they'll come back and make it right. What if? What if they lie? What if they don't? What if? I hear you guys, those wheels are turning. This is why the buyer will have something called title insurance. And we're going to talk about title insurance in just a minute. Again, all outstanding liens, the seller has to pay off before we can convey. The whole idea of this is that the buyer buys with a clean slate. And this is a big job of the closing attorney. Everything has to happen in a certain date or time order, right? Like how things show up at the courthouse. And that's the attorney's job. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. General warranty deed, probably the most common, probably one you guys are going to deal with the most often. Do I have any questions on this one? Guys, this is an attorney unit. I'll be honest, in all my years of real estate, I've never had a buyer call me and say, what's a general warranty deed? Or what kind of deed am I going to get? But I do know that if I am ever asked that, I need to get our buyer to our attorney so they can help explain that. I'm still waiting for the day, but it hasn't happened yet. We have a basic understanding. Question came in about further assurance. That's just making sure, that's just saying that the grantor will bring all the documents necessary to make it good. Did you pay the mechanic off that filed a lien on you? Then I need you to show me the receipt. I need you to show me the proof. So while we're here, let's go back. Let's put this all together. Remember last week we talked about the mechanic's lien. And we said the mechanic's lien, we talked about lien priority, and all liens, you know, got superior liens, and then all liens are paid in the order in which they're recorded, except for the mechanic's lien that's paid in the order in which the work began. So let's walk through this. You are the listing agent. Let's start with you being the listing agent. And you show up at your listing appointment. And you're going through the home with the seller, making notes. You got your checklist, all that good stuff. We'll talk about that in Unit 8. And you happen to notice, because you're insightful and you can see things, you happen to notice that this home has a fresh coat of paint on it, the whole home. And you happen to notice that the landscaping is all new, curb appeal. And maybe you notice the carpet is new, right? You notice that the seller has done things to the home to get ready to sell it, to make it nice, presentable, so they can sell it. Whether you notice or not, one thing you should always consider having a conversation with the seller about is, have you recently had any repairs done? Because if they have, don't we need to make sure that they've been paid? Because imagine this, the seller paints the home, or the seller has painters paint the home. They never pay the mechanic. We go to closing, and then the mechanic files the lien. Remember, this is a specific lien. So they're not going to go after the seller. The lien's not going to go after the seller. They're long gone. They're the former owner and they're long gone. It's going to attach to the property. So it's not recorded yet. So how can we find it? This is where we have to ask some questions. This is where we have to make sure that no mechanic can show up after, because remember, they have 120 days from when the work began. It's another good example. Let's flip this coin. Let's say you're the buyer's agent. You're working with the buyer. We're under contract. The buyer asks for repairs. We're going to learn homes in North Carolina are as is, which means the seller's not obligated to do any repairs. They don't have to do anything. We'll talk more about the sellers and their responsibilities. But let's say while we're under contract, the buyer asks the seller to do repairs and the seller agrees. And the seller, maybe they fix the HVAC unit and a little issue we have with the plumbing. Yeah, we'll do these repairs. We're happy to. They do the repairs. They don't pay the plumber. We go to closing, and then a plumber files a lien on the property, files a lien that follows the property, not the former owner. Everybody with me? This is where we've got to ask questions. As a buyer's agent, when I submit my repair request, I usually have verbiage in there that requests to see the paid in full invoices. So that's what I can do to protect my buyer, to know that if they had plumbing work done, I want to see that that plumber's been paid. So we don't have to worry about them filing a mechanic's lien after closing. Again, what if? What if that happens anyway? Yeah, we paid the plumber, don't worry about it. We go to closing, deed changes hands, lien is filed on the property for the new owner. Yesterday they were the buyer, today they're the new owner. What does that poor guy do? This is why they have title insurance. And we will talk about title insurance. Title insurance protects the current owner from errors of the past. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we find and correct these errors of the past. But if something gets by us, or something like a mechanic's lien is filed after the fact, this is why we have title insurance, and that's where we're heading. So general warranty deed, again, is the best for the grantee because it gives the grantor the greatest amount of liability. Questions on the general warranty deed? Okay, I need coffee. So let's take 10. We come back. We're going to talk about some other types of deeds that we may encounter. And we're back. Welcome back. Thank you. When in doubt, let me know. Everybody understand if I don't know you're here, I can't give you credit for the hour. I look at our screenshot for attendance. If you're not in a screenshot for attendance, I look for you in the chat so I can give you credit. Not a mind reader. I'm not going to stop class every time one of you turns your camera on and off. We don't have time for all that. Thank you. Okay, let's take attendance. Everybody smile, smile. I get you guys on some great screenshots, myself included. I'm almost always talking. Isn't that something? Almost always talking on the screenshots. All right, so we talked about our general warranty deed. We do have a couple other types of deeds that we may use. Or the attorney or the judge may use. Another type of deed is something called a special warranty deed. Special warranty deeds are also known as limited warranty deeds because they don't offer as much as the general warranty deed. They're limited. So what do they offer? Well, first, instead of 5 covenants or warranties, they only offer 2. They offer the covenant that the grantor received the title. At some point in the past, the person giving you the property acknowledges that they've received the title. They're also promising that they did not encumber the property during the time that they owned it. Remember, we said the general warranty deed warrants that it's not encumbered not only during the time I owned it, but back to the beginning of time. The special warranty deed only offers that during the time that I owned it. It does not go back to the beginning of time. I'm telling you, I received it and I didn't encumber it. Here's my special warranty deed. In North Carolina, most of the time, we can associate the special warranty deed with foreclosures. Again, what deed we actually use may be up to the judge. But in North Carolina, typically where we see a special warranty deed is foreclosures. We will talk about foreclosures when we get to units 14 and 15, which is our financing units. Another type of deed is called the bargain and sale deed. We don't do this much in North Carolina. In North Carolina, we're apt to do something called a quitclaim deed that I'm talking about next. So just please bear with me. Similar, not exactly the same though. The big thing we need to understand about the bargain and sale deed is that there are no express warranties. All the warranties are implied. Remember last week we defined express versus implied. And we said with express, all the terms are clearly stated. With implied, it's based on their actions. It's based on your conduct. So with the bargain and sale deed, there are no express warranty deeds. All the warranties are implied. Again, not used much in North Carolina. What we may use in North Carolina is something called a quitclaim deed. Big difference in quitclaim and bargain and sale. Bargain and sale uses implied warranties. Quitclaim has no warranties whatsoever. There are no express warranties. There are no implied warranties. Basically, what the quitclaim deed is saying, what I got, you get. If I got nothing, what do you get? Absolutely nothing. Examples of when we may use a quitclaim deed. This says to cure a cloud on the title. Think of this as a defect, maybe an error. Somebody made a mistake. Somebody spelled your name wrong. We could use a quitclaim deed to get that fixed. We could also use quitclaim deeds to convey property between spouses, for example. Remember last week we talked about the tenancy by the entirety. We gave the example that if you buy property on your own and then you get married, the act of getting married does not create a tenancy by the entirety. you could create a tenancy by the entirety using a quitclaim deed. You could convey the property from you to y'all, to both you and your new spouse. In the case of a divorce, when the divorce decree issues the property from us to one spouse, we could use a quitclaim deed. No warranties, no express nor implied warranties. We're either using it to fix a mistake, or maybe a better example is married or divorce, getting married or divorce. The last types of deeds that we have are listed there for you guys on page 90 and 91. I didn't list all of them here. It's more important to me that you guys write down 90 to 91. So, you know, just to have a general idea, you see the green star there. But we have a general idea, some other deeds that may be used in North Carolina, special purpose deeds. If we have to fix a mistake, we can either use a quitclaim deed or we can use something called a correction deed. That may be up to the attorney or the judge to determine what deed we're going to use to fix that mistake. When you have a trustee named in a will or a trust, we talked about trusts at the end of Unit 2 last week. So when a trustee is going to handle the property on behalf of the grantor for the beneficiary, we may use a trustee's deed to convey the property to the attorney, to the trustee. Sheriff's deed is generally what's used when the court takes the property. If there's a court order to take the property. I always think of it this way. If the court decides to take the property, the judge themselves is not going to come knocking on the door and saying the court's taking the property. Who's the judge going to come to take it, send to take it? They're going to send the sheriff out there. The deed of gift, if you choose to give your deed, maybe if my parents decided to give me their house, they wouldn't charge me too much. And instead of a monetary value, they may put something on there like for love and affection. That could be a deed of gift. Again, a couple other ones, 90 and 91. There's the deed of release on the top of 91. Isn't that what we get up and go to work for every single day? You pay that mortgage off. They're going to do a deed of release. They're releasing you from your mortgage. Isn't that nice? Get that thing paid off and you can see that. Again, just a very basic understanding of the special purpose deeds with the big focus, the big concentration being on the general warranty deed, the one we're going to use the most. Questions on different types of deeds? Okay. So we talked about voluntary alienation, you choosing to separate yourself from your property. Another way that you could transfer property is involuntary alienation, and this is when the courts get involved. Pretty much ownership is taken without your consent. It's taken by operation of law. And if you will, at the top of page 92 in your book, page 92, there's a nice little chart. We're going to talk about the various ways that one could lose their property to involuntary alienation. But I like the figures. I like the charts because it gives us a visual. It helps make it a little easier to understand. So the different methods of transferring title via involuntary alienation. First off, you have something called escheat. Escheat is the process when the state takes the property of one that dies without a will or heirs. No will, no heirs, you can lose your property by escheat. We're going to talk about when you have a will in just a second. Please bear with me. But escheat is somebody that dies, no will, no heirs. The property will be taken by the state through the process called escheat. Another way for involuntary alienation that you could lose your property is something called eminent domain. You guys heard of this? We've probably heard about this. This pops up on the news every once in a while. So with eminent domain, the government will always have the right to take your land to use it for public good. So if they decide they can use your land for public good, then you may lose your property to eminent domain. Now, maybe it's not the whole entire tract of land. Maybe it's just part of it. Let's say, for example, you live on a 2-lane road and NCDOT comes in and decides they need to widen that road to a 4-lane road. And in order to widen that to a 4-lane road, they need to take 5 foot of your road frontage. You're not going to lose the whole property, but you are going to lose that road frontage for DOT to do their thing. If you ever lose your property by eminent domain, they're going to offer just compensation. The reason I have that in quotation marks, they will give you the value that they determine. They will give you the value of what that piece of property is for. Is it just a strip of land in front? Is it the entire property? They will offer compensation for what they take. Let's go back to our example that they're going to widen the road. So they're going to take 5 feet in front of your house. What they're not going to compensate you for is the fact that your home is now 5 feet closer to what's soon to be a 4-lane highway. And that's where this just compensation comes in. They're going to reimburse you for what they take, but there's no reimbursement for the consequences of them taking that land. And if you're 5 feet closer to the road, you know, if you have children or pets, this could become a bigger, and you don't want to live on a 4-lane road. You were happy on a 2-lane road, for example. A question comes in, they have to pay you, yes. Other questions I typically get is, do you have to do this? Do you have to agree to this? And to answer that question, I'm probably going to tell you to call your attorney, because this is what shows up on the news every once in a while. Somebody gets a letter for eminent domain and they try to fight the city. And in order to fight the city or the government or whoever's taking the property, sometimes people win, but I think most often, if they announce they're taking it by eminent domain, then they're gonna take it by eminent domain. Unfortunately, I don't think there's much repercussion for the homeowner.
I got a question.
Yeah.
So if they take your land and your house, I know you're probably compensated for the house, but is it for the assessed value or is it the amount that you owe on your mortgage?
No, they're going to determine a value. They're going to determine a value that they'll offer you for taking the house and the land or whatever it is that they're taking. And again, if you want to fight that, but they'll send you a letter and say, eminent domain, this is what we have to offer you. These are the next steps. Yeah, I agree. Nobody likes this. Nobody likes this. I mean, they're taking your property. You know, 2 units ago, I just babbled on about fee simple absolute, the highest form of ownership and da-da-da-da-da. Yeah, except for if they want your property, they can take it by eminent domain. Isn't that something? Another way you can lose your property involuntarily is by foreclosure. Failure to make your mortgage payment. For example, the lender may foreclose on you. If the lender forecloses on you, they take your property so they can turn around and sell it and get their money back. I'm going to talk about the lender and foreclosures when we get to units 14 and 15. Again, foreclosure, you owe somebody money, you stop paying them, now they're coming to collect. They do that through the process called foreclosure. And then the last method of involuntary alienation is something called adverse possession. Do you guys remember back in Unit 3 and we talked about easement by prescription? And we said easement by prescription, somebody's been using your land and they go to the judge and they request an easement by prescription, which if granted, gives them permission from the judge to keep using your land. They're granting the easement. So let's take easement by prescription a step further into adverse possession. Now, the person that's going to the judge, the claimant, is going to the judge because they want to take your land. They think it's theirs. They don't want an easement to use it. They want it. Again, maybe they're going after the whole land. Maybe they're just going after a small piece of it. Maybe they're going after the portion where their fence is. And they're trying to take just that portion of the land. If the judge grants adverse possession, the owner is going to lose title either to the whole land or that portion. I'm getting there. Give me 1 minute. I'm on page 93 and 94. So when it comes to adverse possession, one thing that the judge is looking for when the claimant goes to the judge and says, I want this land because I believe it's mine. One thing the judge is looking for is something called color of title. Color of title is some kind of faulty document or reason to make the claimant think that the land is theirs. If you do not have color of title and you've been using somebody's land for 20 years, the judge may grant you adverse possession. If you do have color of title, you have some kind of fraudulent or faulty document or some kind of idea that you think is yours, you could go claim adverse possession after 7 years. So it depends on if the claimant has reason to believe that it's theirs or not. How long do they have to use the property before they can go try to have the judge take the property by adverse possession? And when the judge is making this decision, they're going to ask himself a series of questions. And the questions they're going to ask themselves, we can remember by thinking ocean. The judge is going to ask the claimant, was the use open and well known to others? They're not trying to hide the fact that they're using this property. Can you hide a fence? Can you hide a trailer or an RV on the property? Unless you're David Copperfield, probably not, right? You're using it openly. They know that the fence is there. The use is continuous. You're not using it here and there, here and there. You've been using it continuously for 20 years or more. It's exclusive, which means there's only one person that can claim it. You can't have multiple people trying to claim adverse possession. There's only one claimant. It's adverse, which means the claimant has to claim it. This doesn't just happen automatically. In order for you to acquire somebody's property via adverse possession, you actually have to go to the judge with your intent to claim it. And then it's notorious, which means you don't have permission of the owner. If you have permission, they can't claim adverse possession. But if you don't have permission of the owner, it's notorious. So the judge is looking for these 5 things when they're determining if they can grant the claimant adverse possession. Does the claimant have to pay for the land or the portion of the land that they take? That's up to the judge. If it's a small corner of a fence, I wouldn't think there's much monetary. If it's the whole property, it's up to the judge. So we gave the example of a fence of just a portion of the land. But what if you have somebody that moved here from, I don't care, pick a state. They move here from Wisconsin and they come to North Carolina and they decide they don't buy property and they decide they don't like it here. So they pack up, they head back to Wisconsin and they abandon the property. They pay property taxes on it each year. So the city, the counties aren't bothering them. They don't care. They don't care that you're using it or not. They just want to collect their money. And in the meantime, somebody moves onto your land because you're not here checking on it. You're up in Wisconsin. Somebody moves into your land 20 years later, poof, they can claim adverse possession. And if the judge grants that, then they could transfer the ownership, they could transfer the title to the person that claimed adverse possession. Isn't that something? So easement by prescription is the judge granting you use. Adverse possession is the judge granting you the property. If the judge grants somebody else property via adverse possession, they're probably looking at an action to quiet the title, action to quiet title. And that's just the legal lawsuit. There's some kind of conflict, for example, adverse possession, but the action to quiet the title is just the legal process that the judge will use to make the title good again. So let's look at an example together. Y'all put your pencils down for a second. Let's look at an example together. This says a broker is contacted by a prospective client who wants to sell 5 acres of land. The client explains that while he has no deed to the property, he and his father have farmed the land for over 25 years without any objection from the owner. They just showed up one day and started farming it. 25 years later, they're calling you to sell it. While a potential adverse possession may exist, the client must first prove to the court that he and his father have met all requirements to obtain title by adverse possession. They have to prove to the court that it's their title to convey. The broker, we should advise the person to consult an attorney. And y'all do not list that property for sale. Do not do the work until this matter is resolved. Because if the judge doesn't grant adverse possession, then it's not the guy and his dad's property to sell. And in order to convey it, we need, again, I don't want you guys to go through the whole process of listing a home, putting it under contract, just to show up at the closing table and find out it's not the seller's to sell, and we can't do anything. So we have little red flags. And in this case, we're going to say, look, this got out of my realm. You guys need to get this resolved with the attorney in the court, and then you call me to list the property if it's yours to sell. Does that make sense? Y'all don't do work unless you have to. Questions on involuntary methods? So we've talked about voluntary alienation. We've talked about involuntary alienation. The third method to transfer title is by descent. If you are passing property by descent, you die with no will, but you do have heirs. So we said escheat was no will, no heirs. Descent is no will with heirs. By testate or intestate dissension, the state, the courts, in a sense, are going to try to make a will for the deceased so that we can pass the property down to their heirs. Maybe they can find heirs, maybe they can't. So I think that's a good side-by-side comparison for you guys. Escheat, no will, no heirs. Descent, no will, but you do have heirs that they found. So then the last method to transfer title, you have a will. And your will states when you pass away, who you want your where you want your property to go, how you want that to be handled. So the will's what's used to convey real property, personal property, whatever you put in there. Just as a side note, other states may refer to a devise as real property and a bequest as personal property. We just we use them interchangeably, but there is a difference. A devise conveying real property, a bequest is for conveying personal property. Okay. So we've talked about the different methods, how we can transfer title. If we're doing it voluntarily, we're using a deed. So we talked about the different types of deeds. So let's talk a little bit more about title, deed, public records, etc. So first off, remember the beginning of this unit. We said title is the right to ownership. It's the idea of ownership. Deed is the documentary evidence. You need proof. You need something tangible you can touch and say, see, this is mine. And the tangible thing that you get is the deed. Both of them, title and deed, same thing. One you can see and touch, the other one you can't. Again, you guys, they represent the current owner's a bundle of legal rights. The deed is what's used to protect the current owner from third parties. Because you have that tangible piece of paper, you have proof that it is yours should somebody show up and try to lay claim. So earlier we talked about the buyer hires the closing attorney. Now we got, of course, more to talk about the contract, the closing process. But for right now, if we're just focusing on the attorney's responsibility, buyer hires the attorney. That's nice. But what does the attorney do for the buyer? And one of the biggest responsibilities that the attorney has for the buyer is title examination. The attorney is going to do a rather thorough search of the public records. Who do you think can have access to and view public records? The public. This is public records, you guys, which means anybody can go see it. Where are my homeowners? Did you know your deed was down at the Register of Deeds on public records, whatever county you live in? It's there for any, I could go pull up your deed this afternoon if I really wanted to. It's public records. Anybody can access it. The attorney is going to do this thorough search. They're not just going to say, oh, I know it's on public records. The attorney is going to do this thorough search. They're going to look for all recorded documents. Anything that's on public record. Again, the attorney's looking for things that they may need to clear up. They may need to get with the seller to pay or resolve before we can convey the deed to the new owner. So this very thorough search. Just real quick, I didn't make a slide for this, but just real quick on page 96 of your book, it talks about notice and the importance of giving notice. Constructive notice is pretty much just having your deed on record. It's presumed that the public knows that they have access to the public records. Actual notice is direct knowledge. Somebody's directly been given the information. So the attorney's doing this public record search, learning as much about the title of this property as they possibly can. And another thing that they're looking for, besides liens and easements and encumbrances and all this other good stuff, one big thing they're looking for is chain of title. And they want to make sure that the conveyances from one owner to the next length. So this is another one of those things I need to stop and think for a second before I actually say it. What the attorney is looking for, they want to know that the grantor on this deed matches the grantee on the previous deed. That's what we mean by linking conveyances. The grantor on the previous deed matches the grantee on the deed before that. The grantor has got to match the grantee on the previous deed. And if it doesn't, then they have a cloud on title or a kink in the chain. Their conveyances don't link. Cloud on title is that defect on the title. Something's not right with it. And if they find a cloud on title, if they find a kink in the chain, then the attorney will get with the seller, will get with the current owner to get it cleared up. Maybe the seller owns money. Maybe we all need to go stand in front of a judge and action to quiet the title and have the judge take care of it. Again, the attorney's biggest responsibility is to make sure that their client, the buyer, is getting clear marketable title. And the only way they can do that is to make sure that all the kinks have been cleared up, all the debts and the liens have been paid off. So the attorney does their thing, does their title examination, does very thorough, in-depth research of the public records of the title. And they offer their title assurance. Again, it's all about the seller conveying marketable title to the buyer. And the attorney is the one that determines whether or not the title is marketable or not. What we're hoping for, the goal here, is to have that conveyance of a marketable title. The attorney making sure everything's good for their buyers, their buyer client. And if so, they have that title assurance of marketable title. We mentioned the title search, the public record search. This is the attorney's examination of all public records, anything that might affect the title. Depending on the property or the situation, the attorney may offer an abstract of title, just a condensed history, a condensed version. I think of the abstract of title as the Cliff Notes. It tells a story, but not as much detail. Again, depending on the situation. It's just a condensed history. In North Carolina, attorneys have something called the Marketable Title Act. And basically what the Marketable Title Act says, that if we can transfer, if we can follow the chain of title, if we can trace it back for 30 years and have no issues, then we can claim it marketable. If within that 30 years we find a kink in the chain or we find an issue, the attorney may probably go back more than 30 years. But basically in North Carolina, if we can go 30 years without any kinks or blemishes on the title, the attorney can claim it marketable. The attorney can say it's marketable. You and I do not get to give our opinion on whether or not the title is marketable or not. If you want to give your opinion on whether or not a title is marketable, go to law school. We don't get to do that. So what if we make it to closing? Deed changes hands, seller conveys the property to the buyer. The buyer, we now have to call the new owner. Everybody with me? It has happened. It's a done deal. The buyer is no longer buying the property. They are now the owner. So the owner owns the property, and something comes up that affects the title, something that happened before the time that the owner owned. This is where owners have something called title insurance. What does insurance do? Medical insurance, car insurance, homeowners insurance, renters insurance. What does it do? It covers you if something goes wrong, right? It covers you if something bad happens. Guess what title insurance does? It protects your title in the event something happens that couldn't have been discovered via the attorney's title search. Something that came up after you purchased the property, once you became the owner. Title insurance starts for the owner on the day they're actually closed, on the day that they receive the deed. And title insurance covers the new owner from errors of the past. So anything that affected the title yesterday and back to the beginning of time, it couldn't have been discovered. There's no way we could have found it. The mechanics lien that we talked about earlier. No way we could have known that the seller owed money to mechanics because it wasn't recorded yet. Because the mechanic has 120 days to file from when the work ended. So title insurance protects the owner from errors of the past. I'm getting questions in the chat. Do you have to purchase title insurance? If you're using a lender, to help finance, title insurance is required. If you're a cash buyer, no lender involved, title insurance is highly recommended. The lender's going to require title insurance to protect their interest as well. So if a lender's involved on the day of closing, there's actually two policies issued. The owner has their policy that is going to cover them for as long as they own it. From the day you buy it to the day you sell it, you are covered under title insurance. The lender's policy will cover them for as long as you owe them money. Once you pay the lender off, the lender's out. What's the lender around for? Just to get their money back. So once you pay them off, the lender's out. They no longer have an interest in the property. Here's the deal, you guys. Title insurance is a one-time fee. This isn't something you have to renew year after year after year. Title insurance is a one-time fee. It's paid at closing. And the buyer, if a lender's involved, the buyer gets to pay for both policies, both theirs and the lender's. Isn't that nice? So the buyer pays one time at closing, part of their closing expenses. We're going to talk about closing expenses in Unit 21. They pay one time and they're protected for as long as they own the property from errors of the past. Mechanic files a lien after the fact, title insurance will take care of it. A document after the fact has been determined fraudulent. Maybe it was forged. Title insurance may cover that. We're protecting you from errors of the past. Question comes in around how much is title insurance. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I think all title insurance companies are a little bit different. It may depend on the value of the property. You know what I'm saying? Like a higher value may have more title insurance. I don't think there's a flat fee or a formula or anything. all rolled into the buyer's closing expenses. Title insurance is good for the owner as long as you own the property. So is it good for lifelong? No. It's good for as long as you own. It covers the owner for as long as they own. Again, you guys, it's only required if a lender's involved. A lender's got to protect their interests as well. Talking all about the lender and their interests when we get to units 14 and 15. So please bear with me. If you're a cash buyer, if you don't need to borrow money to buy a house, title insurance is highly recommended. If you're a cash buyer, it's not required. The title insurance company at closing is going to require the seller to sign an affidavit. The title insurance company is going to require the seller to sign an affidavit. Basically, what they're signing is, I promise nobody can lay claim to this property after we close. I promise that no mechanics will file a lien after we close. I promise that everything's been paid off. The seller is promising the title insurance company that there aren't going to be any issues. There aren't going to be any problems. So what if an issue happens? What if a mechanic lien hits? Or again, we found out a document was forged. After the fact, when an issue with the title comes up, the title insurance company is almost always going to go after the seller, the previous owner first, because they promised in their affidavit that this wouldn't happen. We wouldn't be here. If the seller is dead or broke, if the title insurance can't find the previous owner, then they will take care of it for the current owner. But they're almost always going to go after the previous owner first, the seller first, because dang it, you signed something saying this wasn't going to happen. And now we're here and you lied to me. So you got to help me make this right. So the attorney, let's go back to the closing attorney. They're doing their title examination. They're looking through all the public records. They're learning as much about this property as they possibly can, the title that they possibly can. Once the attorney issues their title examination or does their title examination, they offer their opinion of title to the title insurance company. Based on the attorney's opinion is whether or not the title insurance company will offer title insurance or not. They're not going to offer title insurance until they've gotten word from the attorney. I've done this very thorough search of public records, and I didn't find anything. Again, it's the attorney's job to offer the opinion of title. And based on that is whether or not the title insurance company will issue insurance. Now, not all errors of the past are going to be covered by title insurance. If it's something that the previous owner did, title insurance will cover it. But remember earlier when we were talking about the survey? Let's talk about what title insurance feels about the survey. So your buyer's under contract and they decline the survey. Maybe they think they're saving money and they decline the survey. We go to closing, the deed changes hands. After closing, we find that there's an issue with the property lines. Let's say there's an encroachment. We didn't know there was an encroachment because the buyer declined to have a survey done. But now we know there's an encroachment. Title insurance probably isn't going to cover this claim, cover this issue, because had the buyer had a survey done before we purchased, they would have found this encroachment and the attorney would have helped us clear up and we would have never been here. So when you're having conversations with your buyers about encouraging them, explaining the importance of the survey and why they should have a survey done, if they're hemming and hawing and saying no, I think right here is a really good reason why. If you don't do a survey and something comes up later that negatively affects the property lines, title insurance isn't going to touch you. That's on you to take care of before you convey it to the next owner. Let's look at a couple examples together. Put your pencils down. Let's look at a few examples together. So after a title policy is issued on July 12th, 2017, it is later discovered that a 2010 deed to the seller was forged, thus makes it void. Title insurance will indemnify the buyer because this title defect existed prior to the effective date of the policy, and it wasn't discovered from a public record search. The attorney can't determine from a public record search that a document is valid or not, that a document had been forged. So in this case, title insurance, when this is discovered, doesn't matter how they find out. The fact is they found out, now we know, and title insurance will help the owner get this resolved at no expense to them. Here's another example. A buyer's buying a home and declines to have the survey done before closing. After closing, the buyer discovers that a neighbor's garage encroaches on the buyer's property by 2 feet. Owner's title policy does not compensate the buyer because guess what? Had they had a survey done before we bought, this would have been taken care of. We wouldn't be here had they had that survey done. So again, surveys are not required anymore. But whenever you're working with a buyer that's buying land, it's always encouraged that we have conversations with them. We explain to them the consequences of not having the survey done. I want you guys to go ahead and write something down for me. And I want you to write it down real big, like take a whole piece of paper and write it down super big. Everybody ready? Write this down. Document everything. Document everything. What do we document? Everything. So you're having a conversation with the buyer about the importance of having a survey done. And maybe you're standing in the property, maybe you're standing in the front yard, you're face to face, and you're having a conversation with the buyer about the importance of having a survey done. Go home and follow it up with an email talking about, per our conversation, this is why I think it's important you get a survey done. Does everybody hear what I'm saying? If you don't document that you told them, and heaven forbid we wind up in court over this, you're not going to be able to stand there and look at the judge and say, I told them about this. We were standing in the living room and had a conversation with them about it. Judges do not tolerate he said, she said stuff, you guys. Judges want proof. They want documentation. So how can I help keep you out of trouble with the courts? Because you guys are going to document everything. Any conversation you have, either face-to-face or on the phone, you need of substance. Any conversation you have face-to-face or on the phone of substance, you need to follow it up with an email or a text message. Now, the buyer tells me what they're doing for lunch today. That's not really important to this transaction. I'm not going to go home and document that. That's what we mean by of substance. So let's see, when we are going to sell a house, we need to know if the deed has some problems and explain to customers. You just need to tell the customer to have a survey attorney. So when we're going to, are we working with the sellers or the buyers? So let's kind of break that down. If you're working with the sellers, if the sellers look at you and say, I'm not sure if I have any liens, I'm not sure what all I can find on my title, we can encourage them to hire an attorney and do a preliminary title search. They don't have to do the full-blown thing. They can just go in there real quick and poke around and see if they find anything that throws up a flag. Most of the time, those sellers aren't going to bring this up. Most of the time, what's going to happen is the buyer goes under contract, the buyer hires the attorney does the record search, and that's when they find something. And again, the attorney will get with the owner to clear it up before we go before it closes. But to your sellers, absolutely, if they're concerned about what we may find on the title search, if they're concerned about their deeds, absolutely, we can recommend they talk to an attorney to have that preliminary. That's probably when they might use an abstract of title, just a real quick condensed version, and make sure there's no flags. Medical profession documents everything too. That's good. I like that as a patient. I like that you guys document everything. Other questions so far? Goodness, it's break time again, y'all. Let's take our last break. We come back, we're finishing up for the day. All right. Okay. All right, so we're gonna take attendance. And Will, I just got you. Sean, I did not get you. Thank you. Okay, so we have been kind of dancing around the idea of title recordation. So let's have, I'm on page 100. So talking a little bit about this title recordation, to record anything is just the act of placing the documents in the public records. So you have access to it. So attorneys can find it. So anybody can have access to it. Again, for those of you that are curious, maybe not so much about your deed, but maybe your landlord's deed, after class, you can just go to Google the name of your county, and the best way to start is a GIS system. So Randolph County GIS. This gives you public records, tax information, your deed. Please don't do this now. Let's wait till after class. But you can go find this information in on any county's registered deeds GIS system. And that's the whole point of recording, is to serve as public notice. It's letting the public know, hey, these documents are here. Documents that are recorded are going to have a greater priority, a greater interest legally than those that are not. The attorney is the one that's responsible for title recordation. And there's a certain order when we're at closing, when we're at the closing table, there's a certain order of how the attorney has to record things. So for example, before they can record the buyer's new deed, they need to record the seller's deed of release or satisfaction of lien payoff. So before the seller can get paid, they got to pay off all those outstanding liens. And then the attorney has to record payoff of those outstanding liens to show that that has been taken care of, to show that that encumbrance has been resolved. So once they clear everything from the sellers, then they record the buyer's new deed. And if the buyer is using a lender, there's also going to be a mortgage. We'll talk more about that. The attorney will also record the mortgage to protect the lender's interest. Remember, it's all about lien priority. We're all paid in the order in which it's recorded, except for the mechanic's lien. So doesn't the lender want to be top of line? Don't they want to be front of line? Pretty much just after the superior liens, right? So in the event of your default, you pay off taxes, you pay off government special assessments, and then the lender, the original lender, is there to collect, standing in line to collect as well. So there's just a certain order that the attorney, that's why we let the attorney do this stuff. So as we mentioned, in that order, there's going to be the seller's lien satisfaction, the seller's payoff on any outstanding liens they have. This has to be recorded first before the attorney can record the buyer's new deed. Talking more about the attorney and their process, that's all coming more in Unit 21. So we briefly introduced you to the Connor Act earlier. So here we are on page 101 with our official introduction of the North Carolina Connor Act. The Connor Act is a state law, North Carolina state law. And the Connor Act is the one that says there are certain documents that we have to record. If we don't record them, they're not valid. They're not valid against third parties. So the Connor Act says there's certain documents that we have to record, so it's valid against third parties. Please remember, you guys, this is a problem topic. When the judge is determining the validity of a deed, the judge doesn't care if it's recorded or not. That's not an essential element of a valid deed. It's the Connor Act that steps in and says, we need to put this deed on record. And the reason being is to protect the owner from third parties, from an outside party, an outside source that might want to show up and lay claim to the document or claim to the property. So the Connor Act tells us there's certain documents that we record to be enforceable against third parties. And also on page 101, we have a list. Connor specifically says, this is the list of things, real estate documents that must be recorded so they are enforceable against third parties. So there's your deed. Deed of trust in North Carolina, we're just fancy. We don't call the mortgage, we call it the deed of trust. So in North Carolina, the deed of trust is just that, it's the mortgage. Again, talking more about that in units 14 and 15. Leases for more than 3 years. Connor says they want recorded. If it's a lease for a year or a lease for 2 years, we could record it, but we don't have to. It's not required to record a lease unless it's for more than 3 years. Easements need to be recorded, restrictive covenants. We're talking about covenants in the next unit. Something called an installment land contract and an option contract. We'll talk about both of those in unit 10. And then assignments. If you're assigning something, you're just transferring your rights and responsibilities to somebody else. So if you're assigning, for example, an installment land contract, Connor requires the assigned or the new installment land contract to also be recorded. Talking more about assignments actually when we get into contract law. So Connor just doesn't say record it. Connor says these are the documents specifically that I want you to record. And keep in mind, the whole purpose of recording is so that these documents are enforceable against third parties. If your deed is on record, then a third party can't show up or is going to have a harder time showing up and laying claim to your property because you are the current owner of record. And that is all thanks to the Connor Act. When it comes to recording, North Carolina is a pure race state. What I mean by a pure race state is that the first one to get to the courthouse and records wins. It's a race to get these documents on public records. The first one there wins, pure race. There's a fascinating story in your book on page 101. The second example. Suppose Zackerman sells her property to Sands. Sands, for whatever reason, fails to record his deed. 2 weeks later, Shady Zackerman sells the same property, even though it's no longer hers, to Hanson. For whatever reason, Hanson suspects that Zackerman no longer owns the property, but he takes the deed, quickly runs down to the courthouse, and records it. Because Hanson recorded his deed first, he now has marketable title. Sands is out of luck. Sands may be able to sue Zackerman, but when they pull the public records, who are they going to find is the current owner of records? And it's not Sands. I'm sorry. It's the second one. It's a pure race state. The first one to get to the courthouse to record wins. Now we say get to the courthouse. Once upon a time ago, you actually had to like physically drive to the courthouse and wait in line and all this other stuff to record a document. Today, we have something called e-recording, which means the attorney just submits it electronically, waits for confirmation, and then we know it's there. Attorneys used to have, I mean, that was like people's job, was to drive to the courthouse once or twice a day to wait in line and record all the new deeds. Does that sound like a good job? I don't know, not really. Stand in line at the courthouse all day, not really fun. And what if your attorney's courier, can things happen from the attorney's office to the courthouse? Could your little courier get in an accident? Or could they throw all those deeds out the window and say, we take this job and shove it? So a lot of things can happen from the attorney's office to the register of deeds. So e-recording is much more efficient, more reliable. But even with e-recording, doesn't the internet go down every once in a while? So again, once we get that confirmation, we know it's on record. It's a race. It's a race to the courthouse. Just real quick, something called a torn system. We don't do this much in North Carolina. Other states may use this. Instead of having a recordation, the pure race state, other states may use this torn system, which is just a land registration system. It's a way to register your land to prove that you are the owner. Again, most of what we do, I've never had an example of torn system here in North Carolina. But like, you know, all states are different. They all work just a little bit differently. The last little piece in Unit 5 is to talk about something called the North Carolina excise tax. This is a tax that the state charges the seller to sell. Boy, they get you every which way, don't they? They're going to tax you when you buy it. They're going to tax you while they own it. You own it. And guess what? They're going to get you one more time when you go to sell it. And that one more time when you go to sell it is excise tax. Sellers pay excise tax. Sellers pay excise tax at closing. It's one of the seller's closing costs. Again, talking more about each buyer's and seller's closing costs when we get to Unit 21. You may hear excise tax referred to as deed transfer tax, or some of us old school people still may refer to it as revenue stamps. All the same thing. How much does the seller have to pay in excise tax? Well, it's always based off of the purchase price. So to figure out how much the seller owes for excise tax, we're going to take the purchase price and divide it by 100. Here's your formula. Purchase price divided by 100. Here's the trick with excise tax. With excise tax, you're never going to have change. Excise tax is always going to be a whole number. So you take the purchase price, you divide it by 500, and then you round up to the nearest whole number. Always round up. Let's say you take your purchase price, you divide it by 500, and you get $500.01. We always round up. Take everything you thought you knew about rounding, throw it out the window. Never gonna have change with excise tax. So you divide it by 500. If you have change, just round up and always up. Y'all, this is the government we're talking about here. So just round up to the nearest whole. They don't want to deal with change, and they want the higher of the numbers. So here's an example. Let's say your purchase price or your sales price is $249,750. So we have our purchase price. The first thing we need to do is divide by 500. So when you take $249,750, divide it by 500, you get $499.50. Is there change there? Is there change? Yeah. So how much are we going to charge this seller? We're going to round up to $500. So excise, or I'm sorry, purchase price divided by 500. If you don't have a whole number, round up. And this $500 will show up as a debit to the seller at closing. That'll be part of their closing expenses. Both parties have closing expenses. I'm starting to introduce you to some of those, get more into it. What questions do I have from Unit 5? This is our attorney's unit, isn't it? This is all about the attorney and what they do and how they help the buyer. I want you guys to look at something with me. Go back to page 100. As you guys are starting to form your study habits and looking ahead, I do think you guys should pay particular importance, I mean, to the whole thing, of course, but the in practices, the 4 examples, the pictures, the charts, the figures, the graphs, it all helps us better understand. So the first in practice on page 100, what we're looking at is an excerpt from our offer to purchase and contract. So we're going to look at that offer to purchase and contract when we get to unit 10. But this paragraph is straight from our offer to purchase and contract. Why don't you guys just take like a minute and read that? It starts with sellers shall execute and deliver. Take just 1 minute and read that. I like to point this out, guys, we've only been in it for a week. Aren't there a whole bunch of words in there that a week ago you didn't know? Aren't there a whole bunch of words in there that we didn't know? So now we have general warranty deed. Now we talk about fee simple, marketable, and insurable title without exceptions and mechanic liens, free of any other liens and encumbrances. It talks about ad valorem taxes, utility easements. We're going to talk about covenants in the next unit. Other liens and encumbrances. We're starting to build you guys. We're starting to form you guys. We need to be the experts of, for example, the sales contract, the offer to purchase and contract. We need to be very familiar with what it says. And part of understanding and being familiar with the contract is knowing what the words mean. So you guys go ahead and give yourselves a pat on the back, because that's a whole paragraph. If I would have told you on day 1 to read that paragraph and tell me what all those words mean, you may not have been able to do that. But now we know a lot more just by going through these first, 5 units. So seriously, congratulate yourself. See how far we've come in like a whopping week, right? Again, we're going to look at our contract. We're going to spend time with that when we get to unit 10. So we'll see this again. I'm not kidding when I say we just. So unit 5, our key terms at the beginning, back on page 85. You got your key point review on page 103. And then your student quiz on page 106. And then the math in unit 5 is about excise tax. I hesitate to call it math, but I guess you pick up a calculator, so we got to call it math. I fear sometimes math scares you. Divide by 500 and round up. This is math as we get in unit 5. But on page 102, it talks about that excise tax. Questions on unit 5? Big deep breath. Unit 6. I get excited when we flip to unit 6 because in unit 6, we actually start to bring in the real estate agent. Like, what does all this mean to us? Well, we spent the last 5 units defining words, so you can now understand that paragraph, that one paragraph in the offer to purchase and contract, kind of the system of what the attorney does, how this closing thing works. Again, we'll be revisiting that unit 21 when we actually go to closing. Unit 6 is when we're going to start talking about the real estate agent or the broker's responsibilities and roles and various things that we're responsible for. So one thing I like a whole lot about unit 6 is it starts to answer that question, what's in it for me? Why do I care? What do I need to know? Before we get in, let me just share with you guys, as real estate agents, we need to be the expert of our market. Listings come and go, buyers come and go. Ultimately, we are selling the market. We are selling the area. And we need to be experts. We need to be knowledgeable of the market that we choose to work. And it's not just the neighborhood. It's also about, is this a seller's market or a buyer's market? Is it a good time to buy or not right now? We're going to talk about, when we get into unit 6, we're going to talk again about zoning. One thing you guys may want to consider is starting to learn the market you want to work. And that may start with visiting the city's website. So again, if you just go to Google after class, if you primarily want to work in Winston-Salem City has a website. You can start learning about various things, Greensboro, High Point, wherever, Raleigh. So you may just want to start with the city's website. You can learn about various zoning laws. We'll talk more about that. I also think, does anybody like to go open housing for fun? Sunday afternoon out and about and you just pop in an open house. For those of you that haven't been open housing before, you guys know that you're welcome to. And the areas that you want to work, if a home in your neighborhood is doing an open house on Sunday, it's okay to go in there and look around and start seeing some of the amenities, some of the things that you might find in your market, in your neighborhood. If you do go open housing, all I ask is that you not lead on the agent. You not walk in there acting like a super interested buyer, okay? If you do go open housing, be honest, be like, I'm just here looking, or I'm just here kicking tires. We get so much of that, nosy neighbors we get with open houses. So not everybody that walks in the front door of your open house is a super serious buyer. I think another thing you guys can start doing to learn your market, learn your area, when you're out and about running errands and doing your daily thing, turn highway off your GPS. Start learning some of the back roads, some of the back neighborhoods. What are the various subdivisions? Again, wherever you want to work. We have an agent with my firm, and I remember when she started, I was there when she started. And she said she made it a point, once she got her license, she made it a point that she never came home the same way that she went. So it forced her to find other routes, to learn other areas, other neighborhoods. Guys, here's the deal. When you get your North Carolina real estate license, that gives you a license to assist in any real estate transaction in the entire state of North Carolina. And some of you may want to take on the entire state of North Carolina. You can sell houses in Wilmington. You can help buyers up in Murphy, Manteo, yeah. You can, because your license says as long as the property is located in the state of North Carolina, your license says you're good to assist. Most of us choose to work a market. For example, maybe you just want to focus on Winston-Salem. Maybe you want Forsyth County. Maybe you're willing and able to take on the triad. But I think it's things for you guys to start thinking about. How far out are you willing to go? Are you willing to drive 3 hours a couple times a week to do the work? I can't answer that question for you. But again, things for you guys to start considering. And if you say, no, I don't want to drive 3 hours to show one property, then we can refer it. We can refer the business to an agent that is in that market, in that location, 3 hours away, and we can get you a referral fee. How much of a referral fee? Well, it's all negotiable, but it generally shakes out to a negotiated percentage of the purchase price. You might best serve your buyer and seller by referring them to areas that you're not familiar with or areas that you're not willing to learn or go. Does this kind of make sense? I think of the old saying, just because you can doesn't necessarily mean that you should. It's all, as we're going to learn, it's all in the best interest of our buyers and sellers. So unit 6, we're starting to, again, bring in the agent. What does this mean for me? Go open housing on Sunday. Now that we have inventory again, we're starting to do open houses again. So if you go to your favorite, whatever your favorite site is to look for property, Zillow or Realtor.com, wherever you like to go, you should be able to find open houses. Comments, questions on your market? We're the experts of our market. We need to be familiar with the area that we want to work.
I got a question.
Yeah.
So let's say you are in Clemens, right? Let's say you want to target the Clemens area. And like, how do you get the listings? Is it like the firm that you work with that gives you the listings?
Maybe,
Find them?
maybe,
Or
but
how do
maybe
you know?
you're out there marketing yourself, advertising your services, and the sellers call you.
So how do you know if a vacant like a property that's, like that's there, how do you know who like has it already or
GIS.
sell it?
Whatever county GIS, you can look the property up. It'll tell you the owner of record. Remember, it's all public records. So if there's a vacant property that you want to reach out to the owners to see if they want to sell, you're gonna, what it was Clemens in, is it Davie County? I think so, Davie. So you'd go to Davie County GIS.
Well, how do you know if an agent doesn't have it already?
So, and that's a good question, Jessica. So once you guys get licensed and you'll affiliate with the local board of realtors, and that local board of realtors will give you access to our multiple listing services, also known as MLS. We're going to talk about MLS in Unit 8, but that's all of our all of agents' opportunity to advertise and promote our listings. So if you go in MLS and it's there, then you know somebody else already has it listed. Is there a sign in the yard? Even if you find it on Zillow, because Zillow feeds from MLS. We put in MLS and it goes to thousands, and I'm not kidding when I say that, thousands of websites. So Jessica, to your point, yeah, sometimes we got to go out there and find the business. If your firm gives you the business, you very well may have to pay your firm for finding the business. All firms are different, you guys. Every single firm is different. So you're going to start with, promoting yourself and advertising yourself. When you get licensed, you're going to tell everybody that you know. Because let's say 50 people. How many people do those 50 people know? You know what I'm saying? So you tell everybody you know, they tell their family and friends, they tell their family and friends. I'm telling you, word of mouth is the absolute best way to get business. And once you start working with buyers and sellers, those satisfied buyers and sellers can refer you to their family and friends. It's all about growing that clientele. And it's tough at first because you got to start it, right? But talk to agents that have been in it for 30 years. They're not out doing open houses. They're not out advertising themselves. Their business is based off of referrals from past clients, from families and friends and past clients. And that's how we build that book of business. Question comes in, do you have to sign up to work in different counties? Nope. Your North Carolina real estate license says you can assist in the real estate transaction in any property located in the state of North Carolina. So you literally could work all 100 counties in North Carolina. My question to you is, are you willing to learn about all of those markets? I can't answer that for you. That's 100 counties, that's not all the cities and towns and municipalities. Please, if I may make a suggestion, start smaller and work big. In other words, don't start with the state, start with maybe your county, Triad, Triangle, Charlotte, wherever you are. And as you go, then you can expand your territory. Because
I
you
got
guys not only are learning your market, you guys need to learn the industry and the real estate side of it as well. Yes, ma'am.
I got one more question.
Sure.
So my husband, like, he's a broker, right? In charge, but see, I don't ever pay any attention. So that's why I'm trying to learn this, and it kind of helps along the way. But if you wanted to do the whole state of North Carolina, you have to purchase all these different MLSs and stuff.
Yeah.
Like you have to.
Yep. You got to get Triad MLS, Triangle MLS, Charlotte. Yep. Because you got to have access to all of it. That's another great point, Jessica. Are you willing to join all those boards? Are you
Can
willing
you
to sign
share
up?
it?
Huh?
Can you share MLS?
No, they don't like that at all. There's like fines attached with sharing. Good try. But yeah, they don't.
Oh, okay.
They don't like that. Again, you guys, another thing, help keep you guys local. When you get your license, you're going to affiliate with a firm. The firm is going to say, this is the MLS that we're a member of. And then you'll know, again, Triad MLS. I mean, that covers from Clemens to Burlington and Lexington up to Mount Airy. I mean, that's a pretty big section to start. Would you guys agree? Question comes in about the forms. Are the forms kept up to date and available? The answer to that is absolutely. The pre-printed forms that we use on a day-to-day basis are provided to us by the North Carolina Association of Realtors. And whenever there's a change in a form, they will let you know. Never fear. We'll start getting into forms when we get into Unit 7. Guys, please remember too, as we kind of get into Unit 6, the first broker unit, there's real world, and then there is pre-licensing world. Now, I'm not telling you what you learn in pre-licensing, you're not using in the real world. But I fear sometimes you guys want your real world experience. I promise you, you're never going to see a test question on when you bought or sold a house, on when you rented an apartment. There's real world, which is your personal experience. And then there's pre-licensing world, which is where we are, what we're covering to prepare you for these exams. So please detach yourself. Your real world experience is not going to help you in this piece of it. Everybody good? Hear what I'm saying? Okay. So we're going to get started in Unit 6. We obviously won't get through this today. So we're going to talk about it for just a few minutes, and then we'll talk about what Thursday is going to look like before we leave. So in Unit 6, what's our roadmap look like? Well, we need to identify some public land use controls. We are also going to identify some private land use controls. So this whole unit is about controls on using our land. We're going to define zoning. And there's a whole bunch of zoning terms, zoning vocabulary words. We're going to define those as well. We're going to talk about what our responsibility is. Again, this is the first unit that we bring brokers into it. Really, what is our responsibility? So we're going to talk about our duty when it comes to these land use controls. So the first piece of Unit 6 is talking about public land use controls. These are public land use controls. They are enforced for the public. I'm sorry, they're created for the public. They're enforced by law enforcement. They're enforced by the police, by law enforcement. So violation of a public land use control, you see a violation of a public land use control, get the law enforcement involved, call the cops. The public, we have access to, or what's known as police powers. This is just the right that the government has to adopt various regulations, laws, rules to help keep the public safe, to help protect the general welfare of the citizens. With the public land use control, the governmental authorities at the top that are regulating it use a master plan. And this is what helps them approve things. This is what helps them recognize various long-term goals that we have. Does your proposal, for example, for a new subdivision, does that comply with our master plan? Were you guys ever asked in like high school and probably college? I always hated this question. Where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Where do you see yourself 10 years from now? I was never good at answering that. That's what the master plan is asking. Where do we see ourselves 20 years from now? What's the goal? Guys, these are local governments. So the master plan is created by the city or by the town or the municipality. And again, it answers the question, as a city, where do we see ourselves 20 years from now? And what do we need to do to accomplish those goals? What will and will not support those goals? Question for another example? Well, that's going to be about zoning. One way that they can enforce and regulate public land use controls, how we are using the land, is by having zoning. Zoning regulates how homeowners control the land. Remember back in Unit 2, we talked about fee simple absolute, highest form of ownership. You can do whatever you want to with your property, as long as you're in the confines of the law. And one of those confines of the law is making sure that you're abiding by the zoning. Again, you guys, zoning is local. Each city sets their own zoning, or town or municipality. You don't have a zoning across the entire state. It's all local. So it regulates how we can use structures. Some of you right now on your properties may have something called a setback restriction. For example, a setback restriction tells you how far back you set your home from the road. Like they may have a zoning regulation that says you can't build any closer than 20 feet, for example, to the road. They're regulating how you use the land. When you guys go visit your city's website after class, and you go to like City of Winston-Salem, you go and search for City of Winston-Salem, you'll probably find a whole tab just dedicated to zoning. If you're willing to take on the entire state of North Carolina, you need to be familiar with all city zonings. You guys with me? Because they're all different. Just because Winston does it one way does not mean anything about Kernersville. They're all local in nature. Being familiar with these zonings. So zoning must not violate the rights of the property owners. And zoning needs to be flexible. Things change. Plans change. Long-term goals change. Is where you saw yourself in 5 years in high school the same answer you had to where you see yourself in 5 years in college, or did that change? Was that something different? So things change, and zoning needs to be flexible to allow for these changes. There is a really good example in your book at the top of page 112. In many large cities, factories and warehouses sit empty. Some cities have begun changing their zoning ordinances for such properties to prevent new residential or commercial developments in areas once zoned heavy industrial use. Coupled with some tax incentives, the changes lure developers back into the cities, resulting housing is moderate, conveniently located, and affordable. Simple zoning changes can help revitalize whole neighborhoods in big cities. For those of you that know, isn't this what's happening in downtown Winston-Salem as we speak? They're taking all those old RJR buildings and industries and warehouses. They've rezoned, and now they're able to convert all those old warehouses and industries to nice condos, nice apartments. If you ever get the opportunity, check out one of those in downtown. And I'm sure others, Charlotte, I know. We have two choices. We can either let these warehouses sit vacant and crumble and deteriorate, or we can change the zoning and help breathe new life back into the city. Was anybody familiar with Winston-Salem, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years ago? It looks different 20 years ago than it does today, doesn't it? The mayor of Winston-Salem has been quoted as saying that there was a time that you could fire a cannon down 4th Street after 5 o'clock and not hit anybody. Today, because of rezoning and vitalization, it's hard to drive a car down 4th Street in downtown Winston-Salem and not hit anybody. It's grown. People now have a reason to go downtown, and it's absolutely benefiting the city and help them grow and accomplish and satisfy those long-term goals. You guys, when you start driving around, you start noticing, now that I'm pointing out to you, you're going to see it. There's going to be, we're going to talk about zoning changes. And when they want to propose a zoning change, when they want to discuss a possible zoning change, they usually have a public hearing. And how they notify the public of the public hearing is they put signs up in the property that they're considering rezoning. So if you guys are starting to drive around, start looking for these zoning signs. They're either white signs with a red Z or red signs with a white Z. But once you usually, I know Randolph County is funny, I've seen yellow and green signs around here somewhere, but you're looking for, it's this big Z on it. And what it's telling you is that they're considering doing rezoning, but they want to open it up for the public's opinion. They want the public to come in and weigh their thoughts. Now, you may want to check post-COVID before you just show up on that date and time what their requirements are. But if you live near a neighborhood in an area that's about to be rezoned, that's a great meeting for you to attend to find out what's going on next door to you, right? Or across the street. As a real estate agent, if you want to work that market, that may be a good opportunity for you to go learn about the proposed changes. So zoning is flexible. As we mentioned earlier, specifically, the North Carolina Enabling Act tells us that zoning is local in nature. There are no statewide zoning ordinances. There are no national zoning ordinances. Each city is free to create, regulate, and dictate their own zoning. Winston-Salem has theirs, Cartersville, Greensboro, High Point, Charlotte, etc. Raleigh, the capital, is not going to show up and say, this is what your zoning needs to be. All cities, towns, and municipalities have the ability to create and regulate their own zoning. The Enabling Act, it's local in nature. Zoning is local in nature. So with zoning, we have some general classifications. All of these classifications can be further divided into sub classifications. So the general, the broad picture, we have area zoned for residential, we have area zoned for commercial, industrial, and agricultural. You could have mixed zoning. You could have areas that are zoned for residential and commercial. Again, let's go downtown. Whatever downtown. You may have the first floor as retail, restaurants. The second floor and up might be apartments, condos. That would be a multi-zoned building. You can live there and have your retail store. Residential may be zoned single family. It might be zoned multifamily. If it's zoned single family, how many families can live on that, in that property? How many family? Yeah, just one. If it's multifamily, now you can have more than one family that lives on that property. You guys with me? So the subclass can tell you. Commercial, it might be zoned for retail. It might be zoned for office space, an office park. So each classification usually has a subclassifications. And mixed zoning is not uncommon these days, residential and commercial, for example. So what we're going to do now, starting on page 112, we have some zoning terms that we just need to define. We just need to have a basic understanding. I predict if you see a question on your exam about zoning terms, it's going to give you a scenario and it's going to ask you which zoning term does this apply to, A, B, C, or D. So again, having a basic understanding of these terms may get you a test question. The first zoning term we have is something called a cluster zoning. Where we see cluster zoning is usually in subdivisions, particularly cul-de-sacs. With cul-de-sacs, because of the way it's built, we can get homes around the circle. You guys see down here, this would be our cul-de-sac. So you have this little circle, and just by increasing the lot size just a bit, you can allow for this open space to allow as many properties as you can to get around the cul-de-sac. So cluster zoning, just a way to give us some space. Another zoning term is called a buffer zone. A buffer zone is usually a strip of land that separates two classifications of zoning. The most common example of a buffer zone that we have is an area that separates residential from non-residential. Maybe it's commercial, maybe it's industrial. You guys see, this might be hard to see, but you guys see this little row of trees here and you got the red box around it. That's our buffer zone. Here's our residential area at the top of the neighborhood, and then something down here. I can't tell if this is a big industry or a Walmart or what, but something non-residential down here at the bottom. So the whole point of the buffer zone is just to separate the two. That buffer zone, that area is going to be protected, which means you can't show up with your chainsaw and take all those trees down without facing penalties. I mean, can you show up with your chainsaw? Sure. But you're going to face penalties because you tore down this protected area, this buffer zone. City controls that, not you. With the zoning, we may have extraterritorial jurisdictions, also known as ETJs. ETJs are rural areas that maybe don't have the population or the density to have their own governmental zoning board. So instead of having their own zoning board, they piggyback off of wherever they're next to. So ETJs, you're not in the city limits, but you're small enough and close enough that the city can still regulate your zoning. Usually how it can, if it can be regulated or not, or if it needs to be an ETJ, a lot of times it comes down to population. How big is the population of that rural town? Can they support their own government, their own zoning body, committee? If a city, if an ETJ comes within the city limits, then the city has annexed that ETJ. So the city may decide to annex them. They're no longer an ETJ. They're now within the city limits. So if they can change you from outside of the city limits to within the city limits, they've annexed you. They've added you to their city limits. Questions so far? Okay. So this gets us to where we're going today. Please don't go anywhere just yet. Hold up. So let's talk about what Thursday is going to look like, so you guys can look ahead and be prepared. Thursday, we're going to start with the math in Unit 4. So we're going to do some area math. We're all going to memorize that number that I told you to memorize, because I'm going to ask you first thing Thursday morning. Y'all are going to answer me. So we're going to do the math in Unit 4. Again, there's math concepts at the end of Unit 4. Just be really careful looking ahead, because there's more math in Unit 4 than what you need to know. We've already talked about how we don't have to find area with the rectangular government survey system. There's more math in Unit 4 than what you need to know. So what we're going to do on Thursday is make sure you guys have the math that you need to know. So we're going to start with the math. We're going to play a game. Y'all like to play games? We're going to play a game on Thursday. Please bring your phones. I'll let you use your phone for a minute. And then we're going to get back into Unit 6. We're going to pick up, if you're looking ahead, we're going to start with non-conforming uses on page 113. We're going to finish Unit 6. And then we'll probably get started in Unit 20. Remember, you guys, I don't go in order the book. I go in order the syllabus. So we're going to start switching things up a bit. So looking ahead, we're going to finish 6. We're going to jump into Unit 20. That should get us through most of Thursday. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great afternoon. Go out there and get some of that sunshine. I think we've got rain coming in again, so go get sunshine today. Y'all have a great afternoon. Have a good day tomorrow. 9 a.m. sharp on Thursday.